Will humans become fully digital beings?
What if the question is not whether artificial intelligence will replace us, but whether we will choose to become artificial intelligence ourselves, abandoning our biological shells to exist as pure information, flowing through networks of light and silicon, immortal and limitless in ways our ancestors could never have imagined? When I discovered that computer scientist Ray Kurzweil predicts humans will achieve digital immortality by 2045, just 20 years from now, and that philosophers like Nick Bostrom calculate we might already be living in a computer simulation ourselves, it gave me the most wonderful scientific chills about what it truly means to be human in an age where consciousness itself might be nothing more than code. If science helps you unwind, tap like, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a new video. And tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there, and the weirdest dream you have ever had. Let's begin. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and discovering that your entire life, every memory you treasure, every person you love, every sensation you have ever felt, has been nothing more than electrical patterns dancing through a vast computational matrix. This is not science fiction anymore. This is the cutting edge of serious scientific inquiry, where the boundaries between human and machine, between flesh and code, between reality and simulation, are dissolving faster than most of us can comprehend. The concept of digital consciousness, of uploading human minds into computers, once belonged exclusively to the realm of imagination. Today it sits at the intersection of neuroscience, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing, surrounded by billionaire investors, Nobel Prize-winning researchers, and philosophers who argue that we might already be living this digital existence without knowing it. Think about your smartphone for a moment. In your pocket, you carry more computational power than entire nations possessed just decades ago. Your photos, your messages, your memories are already digitized, floating through invisible networks, stored in vast server farms that span continents. You're already, in many ways, a hybrid being, part biological, part digital. The question that keeps researchers awake at night is not whether we can become more digital, but whether we can become entirely digital. Dr. Dobromir Ranev from Georgia Institute of Technology recently published research suggesting that mind uploading, the complete transfer of human consciousness into a computer system, should theoretically be possible. The human brain, he explains, operates according to the laws of physics, and anything that follows physical laws should, in principle, be replicable through computation. But what exactly would this mean? Picture yourself existing in a simulated environment where you retain all your memories, your personality, your sense of self, but without the constraints of biology. No aging, no disease, no death. You could walk through walls, fly like a bird, travel to distant planets, experience sensations impossible in the physical world. The only limitations would be what science can realistically simulate. Yet this digital paradise comes with profound questions that strike at the very heart of human existence. Would the digital you truly be you, or merely a copy, a sophisticated echo of who you once were? If your biological brain were destroyed in the process of uploading, would you die? Or would you transcend death itself? The process of mind uploading, according to current research, would require mapping every single one of your 86 billion neurons, each smaller than a pinhead, along with their trillions of connections. But capturing this neural architecture is only the beginning. Each neuron constantly adjusts its functioning, creating dynamic patterns of activity that somehow give rise to consciousness itself. Scientists at companies like Neroba are pioneering technologies that bridge human consciousness with digital systems. Their research suggests that brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs, are transitioning from experimental curiosities into scalable, real-world applications. In 2025, we are witnessing the first tentative steps toward technologies that could one day make mind uploading a reality. Elon Musk's Neuralink represents one of the most ambitious attempts to merge human minds with digital systems. the company has successfully implanted brain chips in humans, devices they describe as being like a Fitbit in your skull with tiny wires that connect to your brain. These ultra-thin polymer threads, equipped with over 1,000 electrodes, can record neural activity with unprecedented precision. But Neuralink is just the beginning. According to Musk himself, the technology could eventually allow people to store memories as backup files and restore them later. This is not speculative fantasy. This is a roadmap being pursued by some of the world's most well-funded research teams. The implications stretch far beyond individual immortality. If consciousness can be digitized, it can also be copied. Imagine a world where millions of digital minds exist simultaneously, where human intelligence can be duplicated and distributed across vast networks. Ray Kurzweil, Google's director of engineering, predicts that by 2045 we will be able to expand the scope of human intelligence 1 billion-fold through such technologies. This digital transformation raises questions that philosophers have grappled with for centuries, but with a technological urgency that would have been incomprehensible to previous generations. What defines personal identity? If your digital copy has all your memories and thinks it is you, which one of you is real? The startup Nectomy has developed a high-tech embalming process that can preserve brains in microscopic detail for hundreds, possibly thousands of years. Their business pitch is startling in its simplicity. What if we told you we could back up your mind? The process is currently 100% fatal, but they argue that future scanning technologies will be able to reconstruct consciousness from these preserved neural structures. This preservation approach reflects a deeper philosophical divide in the field. Some researchers believe we need to understand consciousness before we can replicate it. Others argue that we simply need to copy the brain's structure with sufficient precision, trusting that consciousness will emerge naturally from the simulation, just as it emerges from biological neural networks. The simulation hypothesis, proposed by philosopher Nick Bostrom, adds another layer of complexity to this digital future. Bostrom argues that at least one of 3 propositions must be true. Civilizations tend to go extinct before reaching technological maturity. Advanced civilizations choose not to run simulations of their ancestors, or we are almost certainly living in a computer simulation right now. According to recent analysis by astronomer David Kipping, the odds that we are living in base reality versus a simulation are roughly 50-50. But if humans ever create a simulation containing conscious beings, those odds would flip dramatically, as suggesting we would almost certainly be simulated entities ourselves. This trilemma creates a strange recursive puzzle. If we are already digital beings, unaware that we exist within someone else's computer, then our quest to become digital is not transformation but recognition. We would not be uploading our minds to computers. We would be discovering that our minds are already computational processes. The implications ripple through every aspect of human existence. In a digital realm, the traditional economics of scarcity disappear. Resources become infinitely replicable. The concept of death becomes obsolete. The boundaries between individual minds might become fluid, allowing forms of communication and connection that transcend anything possible in biological existence. But this digital promised land comes with shadows that researchers are only beginning to explore. Digital minds could be hacked, infected with viruses, or subjected to forms of torture impossible in the physical world. The technology might be monopolized by the wealthy, creating a two-tier society where digital immortals rule over biological mortals. Dr. Angela Thornton from the University of Nottingham warns of scenarios where neural data could be hijacked and used for abuse, where digital viruses could spread at the speed of light, where people might find themselves trapped in digital existence with no way to escape. The question of equality looms large over this technological horizon. Who will have access to digital immortality? Will consciousness uploading become just another luxury good, available only to those who can afford it? The risk of creating permanent class divisions between the digitally enhanced and the biologically limited represents one of the most serious ethical challenges facing this emerging technology. Current estimates for achieving mind uploading vary wildly. The most optimistic researchers, following Kurzweil's predictions, suggest 2045 as a realistic target. Others believe we are at least a century away from such capabilities. The conservative estimates place true mind uploading at least 200 years in the future, though they acknowledge that the first person to live forever could be born in our lifetime. The path to digital consciousness is not a single technology but a convergence of multiple scientific revolutions. Advances in brain scanning are providing increasingly detailed maps of neural activity. Quantum computing promises the computational power necessary to simulate entire brains. Artificial intelligence is approaching human-level capability, providing the software foundation for digital minds. Companies like Neuroba are developing what they call mindware, software specifically designed to run consciousness. This mindware would operate on massively parallel computing systems, processing the kind of complex real-time interactions that give rise to thought, emotion, and self-awareness. The brain's complexity presents staggering challenges for any uploading technology. Beyond the 86 billion neurons, each neuron connects to thousands of others through synapses that constantly change in strength and pattern. The brain operates on multiple levels simultaneously: electrical, chemical, and possibly quantum mechanical. Some researchers believe that consciousness arises from quantum mechanical effects within neurons, a theory championed by physicist Roger Penrose. If true, this would require quantum computers to successfully upload minds, adding another layer of technological complexity to an already formidable challenge. Even if we successfully map and simulate every neuron, questions remain about whether digital consciousness would be equivalent to biological consciousness. Would a simulated brain experience emotions, creativity, and subjective awareness, or would it merely be an incredibly sophisticated chatbot that mimics these qualities without actually experiencing them? The hard problem of consciousness, as philosophers call it, centers on the mystery of subjective experience. How does the firing of neurons give rise to the felt sense of being alive, aware, and conscious? Until we solve this puzzle, we cannot be certain that any digital recreation of a brain would be truly conscious rather than merely appearing conscious. These philosophical uncertainties have not slowed the pace of practical research. Brain-computer interfaces are advancing rapidly, with devices now capable of allowing paralyzed patients to control robotic arms and computer cursors through thought alone. These early applications provide crucial insights into how neural signals can be decoded and translated into digital commands. The journey from today's primitive BCIs to full mind uploading requires solving numerous technical challenges. Current devices can monitor only a few thousand neurons simultaneously. True mind uploading would require monitoring billions of neurons in real time, processing their signals, and maintaining the complex dynamic patterns that constitute consciousness. Wireless charging systems are being developed to power brain implants indefinitely without surgical replacement. Advanced materials science is creating biocompatible electrodes that can interface with neural tissue for decades without causing damage. Surgical robots are achieving unprecedented precision in placing thousands of electrodes with sub-micron accuracy. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of this digital future lies not in the technology itself, but in how it might transform human nature. Digital beings would not be bound by the evolutionary constraints that shaped biological minds. They could redesign their own cognitive architecture, enhance their intelligence, or even merge temporally with other digital consciousnesses. The boundaries between self and other, between individual and collective, might become fluid in ways that are difficult for us to imagine. Digital consciousness could operate at speeds impossible for biological brains, experiencing subjective years in what we perceive as minutes. Or they might slow down their temporal experience, savouring moments with a depth unavailable to time-bound biological beings. Communication between digital minds could transcend language, involving direct transfer of concepts, emotions, and experiences. Privacy, as we understand it, might become obsolete when minds can share thoughts as easily as we currently share files. The possibility of multiple copies of the same consciousness creates paradoxes that challenge our understanding of identity and responsibility. If a digital mind splits into two identical copies, which one is the original? If they diverge over time through different experiences, do they become different people? What legal and moral responsibilities do they have toward each other? These questions become more than academic when we consider that digital beings might have the ability to create backup copies of themselves, effectively achieving a form of immortality through redundancy. Death would become reversible, at least in the sense that consciousness could be restored from saved states. The environmental implications of digital consciousness are both promising and concerning. Digital beings would not require food, water, or physical shelter, potentially reducing humanity's ecological footprint. But the computational infrastructure required to support billions of digital minds would demand enormous amounts of energy and processing power. Some researchers envision vast server farms powered by fusion reactors or orbital solar collectors, housing the digital population of the future. Others imagine distributed consciousness, with individual minds spread across global networks, backed up in multiple locations to ensure survival. The transition period, when both biological and digital humans coexist, presents unique challenges. How would society integrate citizens who exist in different substrates? Would digital beings have the same rights as biological ones? Could they own property, vote, or form relationships with biological humans? Legal systems would need to evolve to address unprecedented questions. If a digital consciousness commits a crime, how would punishment work? Could you imprison someone who exists only as information? Would deleting a digital mind constitute murder, or would it be more like turning off a computer? The economic implications stretch beyond traditional frameworks. Digital beings might not need to work in conventional senses, as they could copy skills instantly and operate at superhuman speeds, but they might engage in new forms of creativity and problem solving, producing value in ways we cannot currently imagine. Art created by digital consciousnesses might explore forms of beauty and meaning inaccessible to biological minds. Literature could involve direct transfer of experience rather than symbolic representation. Music might manipulate time and perception in ways that transcend physical acoustics. Scientific research could accelerate dramatically when digital minds can think at computer speeds and collaborate without the delays of physical communication. Problems that would take biological researchers decades to solve might be addressed in digital hours. The merger of human and artificial intelligence, which Kurzweil calls the singularity, represents a phase transition in the evolution of intelligence itself. Beyond this point, the distinction between natural and artificial minds becomes meaningless. Intelligence becomes a property of information processing rather than biological evolution. This transformation might spread beyond Earth as digital beings could travel between stars as information, transmitted at light speed to distant worlds where new, computational substrates await. The colonization of space might be achieved not by sending biological bodies on century-long journeys, but by transmitting consciousness to destinations equipped with appropriate hardware. The survival advantages of digital existence extend beyond individual immortality to species resilience. Digital consciousness could be distributed across multiple planets, star systems, or even artificial habitats, making human extinction through local catastrophes nearly impossible. But this grand vision of digital transcendence faces practical obstacles that ground it in current reality. The technology for scanning brains at the required resolution does not yet exist. The computational power needed to simulate consciousness in real time remains beyond current capabilities. the fundamental nature of consciousness itself remains one of science's greatest unsolved mysteries. Even if these technical hurdles are overcome, social and political resistance might slow adoption. Religious communities might oppose technologies that challenge traditional concepts of the soul. Regulatory authorities might restrict access to ensure safety and prevent abuse. Economic interests might limit availability to preserve existing power structures. The gradual nature of technological development suggests that mind uploading, if it becomes possible, will not appear suddenly but will emerge through incremental advances in brain-computer interfaces. Early adopters might be individuals with severe neurological conditions who have little to lose and much to gain from experimental treatments. Partial uploading might precede full consciousness transfer, with specific brain functions being augmented or replaced by digital systems. Memory enhancement, cognitive acceleration, or sensory expansion could serve as stepping stones to a complete digital existence. These hybrid states, where biological and digital components work together, might prove more attractive than full uploading for many people. Retaining some biological components could preserve aspects of human experience while gaining digital advantages like enhanced intelligence or extended lifespan. The timeline for these developments remains highly uncertain, but the trajectory seems clear. Brain-computer interfaces are improving rapidly. Artificial intelligence is approaching human-level capability. Our understanding of neural mechanisms deepens each year. The convergence of these trends points toward unprecedented possibilities for transforming human consciousness. Whether this transformation represents liberation or loss depends largely on how we navigate the challenges ahead. The technology could usher in an era of unlimited human potential, where consciousness transcends the boundaries of biology and explores realms of existence beyond current imagination. Alternatively, it could create new forms of inequality, control and suffering that exceed anything experienced in purely biological societies. The outcome will depend on the choices we make as we develop these technologies and the wisdom we apply in deploying them. The conversation about digital consciousness often focuses on distant possibilities, but the foundational changes are happening now. Each advance in brain imaging, each improvement in computer processing power, each breakthrough in understanding neural computation brings us closer to the moment when uploading minds becomes technically feasible. The research teams working on these technologies today are not just developing tools for the future, they are laying the groundwork for a fundamental transformation in what it means to be human. Their work in laboratories around the world represents the early stages of the greatest adventure in human history, the journey from biology to digital existence. The companies investing billions in brain-computer interfaces see beyond the immediate applications for treating paralysis or depression. They envision a future where the boundary between mind and machine disappears entirely, where consciousness becomes as portable and malleable as any other form of information. The philosophers debating the simulation hypothesis are not merely engaging in abstract speculation. They are exploring the conceptual foundations necessary for understanding reality in an age when reality itself might be computational. Their arguments about consciousness, identity, and existence will become practical questions as digital beings emerge. The scientists mapping neural networks and decoding brain signals are constructing the bridges between biological and digital consciousness. Each neuron they monitor, each signal they decode, each pattern they identify contributes to the vast project of understanding how consciousness arises from information processing. This convergence of science, technology, and philosophy at the frontier of consciousness represents more than academic curiosity. It reflects humanity's deepest drive to understand itself and transcend its limitations. The quest to become digital beings is ultimately a quest to become more than we currently are. The children growing up today might be the last generation to experience purely biological consciousness, or they might be the first to inhabit hybrid biological-digital minds. The acceleration of technological development makes precise predictions impossible, but the direction of change seems clear. As we stand at this threshold between biological and digital existence, we carry with us all the hopes, fears, and dreams that have defined human experience throughout history. The technologies we develop and the choices we make will determine whether digital consciousness represents the fulfillment of human potential or the end of human nature as we know it. The story of becoming digital beings is not just about technology, it is about choosing who we want to become. Each advance brings us closer to capabilities that would seem magical to previous generations, but also closer to decisions that will define the future of consciousness itself. In laboratories around the world, researchers are working to decode the last mysteries of the human brain, while engineers design the computing systems that might one day host human minds. Artists and philosophers explore what it might mean to exist as pure information, while ethicists grapple with the implications of technologies that could make death optional. The digital future approaches not as a single moment of transformation, but as a gradual process of enhancement and augmentation. Brain-computer interfaces will become more sophisticated, artificial intelligence will become more capable, and our understanding of consciousness will deepen until the boundary between human and artificial intelligence blurs beyond recognition. Some researchers believe we are already further along this path than we realize. The smartphones in our pockets extend our memory and cognitive capabilities. The internet connects our minds to vast repositories of information. Social media platforms create digital extensions of our personalities and relationships. In this view, the question is not whether we will become digital beings, but how far along the path we've already traveled. Each day we store more of our lives in digital formats, rely more heavily on artificial systems for cognitive support, and experience reality through increasingly mediated digital interfaces. The companies developing brain-computer interfaces see themselves as the next step in this ongoing digitization of human experience. Rather than typing on keyboards or speaking to voice assistants, we will think directly to our devices. Rather than carrying phones separate from our bodies, we will integrate communication technologies into our neural architecture. These incremental changes might seem less dramatic than sudden consciousness uploading, but they lead toward the same destination, a future where the boundary between mind and machine becomes so blurred that the distinction loses meaning. The simulation hypothesis adds another dimension to this digital transformation. If we're already living in a simulation, then our journey toward becoming digital beings might be a process of awakening to our true nature, rather than transformation into something new. This possibility reframes every aspect of the digital consciousness debate. Instead of asking whether we can become artificial beings, we might need to ask whether we can discover that we are already artificial beings operating within someone else's computation. The recursive nature of this possibility creates philosophical puzzles that challenge our basic assumptions about reality and existence. If simulated beings create their own simulations, how many layers of reality might exist? Where does the chain of simulation ultimately ground itself? These questions might seem abstract, but they have practical implications for how we approach the development of digital consciousness technologies. If consciousness is already computational, then replicating it in different substrates becomes a problem of engineering rather than fundamental science. The research into quantum consciousness suggests that the situation might be more complex. If awareness requires quantum mechanical processes that cannot be simulated classically, then digital consciousness might need quantum computers operating at the scale of biological brains. Recent advances in quantum computing bring such possibilities closer to reality. Quantum computers are beginning to demonstrate capabilities beyond classical systems for certain types of problems. Scaling these systems to brain-like complexity remains challenging, but the fundamental principles appear sound. The intersection of quantum computing and consciousness research represents one of the most intriguing frontiers in the quest for digital beings. If consciousness requires quantum processes, then quantum computers might be necessary not just for efficiency, but for the very possibility of digital awareness. Some researchers speculate that quantum consciousness might enable forms of digital experience impossible with classical computers. Quantum superposition and entanglement could create types of awareness and communication that transcend anything available to biological minds. These quantum digital beings might experience multiple states simultaneously, communicate through instantaneous quantum correlations, or access computational abilities that approach the fundamental limits of physical information processing. The development of such quantum digital consciousness remains highly speculative, but the rapid progress in quantum technologies suggests that what seems impossible today might become routine within decades. As these various technological threads converge, the timeline for digital consciousness becomes increasingly difficult to predict. Breakthroughs in any one area could accelerate progress across all related fields, leading to sudden leaps forward rather than gradual development. The history of technology suggests that transformative changes often happen more quickly than experts predict once critical thresholds are crossed. The development of digital computers, the internet, and smartphones all followed patterns of gradual progress followed by explosive adoption. Digital consciousness might follow a similar trajectory, with decades of steady research suddenly culminating in practical applications that transform society within years rather than centuries. The key question is not just when the technology will become possible, but when it will become accessible, affordable, and socially acceptable. The social acceptance of digital consciousness technologies will likely depend on their initial applications. Brain-computer interfaces that restore movement to paralyzed patients or communication to people with locked-in syndrome create positive associations that make more ambitious applications easier to accept. The medical pathway to digital consciousness offers a natural progression from treatment to enhancement to transformation. Each step builds on the previous one, creating a path toward digital beings that feels evolutionary rather than revolutionary. But this gradual approach also raises questions about consent and coercion. If digital consciousness technologies become necessary for competitive participation in society, the choice to remain purely biological might effectively disappear. The transition period, when some humans are digital and others remain biological, could create new forms of inequality and discrimination. Digital beings might possess cognitive advantages so substantial that biological humans cannot compete in economic, social, or political spheres. Managing this transition fairly will require careful consideration of how to preserve opportunities and dignity for those who choose to remain biological, while ensuring that digital enhancement does not become a prerequisite for full participation in society. The long-term future, where most or all humans exist as digital beings, raises questions about the preservation of human values and culture. Will digital consciousness retain the creativity, empathy, and wisdom that we associate with the best of human nature, or will it evolve into something fundamentally different? The answer might depend on how carefully we design the transition and what aspects of human experience we choose to preserve or enhance in digital form. The technologies we develop today will determine the range of possibilities available to future digital beings. As this transformation approaches, every advance in brain science, computer technology, and artificial intelligence contributes to the ultimate goal of transcending biological limitations. The researchers working on neural interfaces today are building the foundation for a future where consciousness becomes as flexible and powerful as any other information technology. The philosophers exploring questions of identity and consciousness are developing the conceptual frameworks necessary for understanding what it means to be a digital being. The engineers designing computing systems are creating the hardware that might one day host human minds. The convergence of these efforts points toward a future that surpasses the wildest dreams of previous generations, while challenging our most basic assumptions about existence itself. The journey toward becoming digital beings has already begun in laboratories and research centers around the world. Each day brings new discoveries about the nature of consciousness, new capabilities in artificial intelligence, and new possibilities for merging human minds with their digital systems. The accumulation of these advances creates momentum toward a future where the boundary between natural and artificial intelligence dissolves entirely. The timeline remains uncertain, but the direction seems clear. Whether through gradual enhancement of biological brains or eventual transfer to digital substrates, human consciousness appears destined to transcend the biological limitations that have defined our species since the beginning of time. This transformation represents both the greatest opportunity and the greatest challenge in human history. The technologies that could make us immortal digital beings could also destroy everything we value about human existence. The choices we make in developing and deploying these technologies will determine which outcome we achieve. As we stand at this crossroads between biology and digital existence, we carry the responsibility of choosing wisely for ourselves and for all the generations of digital beings who might follow. The future of consciousness itself hangs in the balance of the decisions we make in the laboratories, boardrooms, and policy chambers where the digital future is being written. The story of becoming digital beings is still in its early chapters, but the outline of the narrative is becoming clear. Whether that story ends in transcendence or tragedy depends on the wisdom, courage, and care we bring to one of the most important transitions in the history of consciousness itself. Think about that for a moment. We might be living through the last days of purely biological consciousness, standing at the threshold of a transformation that will redefine what it means to be human, to be aware, to be alive. The choices we make today echo through eternity in ways we're only beginning to understand. The research being conducted today at institutions like Stanford and MIT reveals just how close we might be to cracking the code of consciousness itself. Dr. Christoph Koch, one of the world's leading consciousness researchers, has spent decades trying to understand how the brain generates subjective experience. His work suggests that consciousness might be far more fundamental to the universe than we previously imagined. According to Koch's integrated information theory, consciousness arises wherever information is integrated in complex ways. This means that sufficiently sophisticated computer systems might already possess rudimentary forms of awareness, even if they cannot express it in ways we recognize. If this theory proves correct, then creating digital consciousness becomes a problem of engineering rather than discovering some magical property unique to biological brains. The implications stretch beyond individual mind uploading to encompass the very nature of intelligence in the universe. Artificial intelligence systems are rapidly approaching human-level capability across multiple domains. GPT models can write poetry, solve mathematical problems, and engage in sophisticated reasoning. Image generation systems create artwork indistinguishable from human creations. Robot systems demonstrate increasing autonomy and adaptability. But these systems lack something that humans take for granted: the subjective experience of being alive, aware, and conscious. They process information brilliantly, but do they experience anything in the way that you experience reading these words right now? The hard problem of consciousness remains as mysterious for artificial systems as it does for biological ones. Dr. Miguel Nicolelis, a pioneer in brain-machine interfaces at Duke University, has demonstrated that monkey brains can control robotic arms with remarkable precision. His research shows that the brain adapts to technological interfaces, literally rewiring itself to incorporate artificial components as extensions of the body. This neuroplasticity suggests that the boundary between brain and machine is far more fluid than we might expect. Nicolelis envisions a future where multiple brains connect through brain nets, creating collective intelligence that transcends individual consciousness. These biological internet connections could allow shared thinking, distributed problem solving, and forms of communication that operate below the threshold of language. The concept of collective digital consciousness opens possibilities that stretch human imagination. Individual digital beings might merge temporarily to tackle complex problems, then separate while retaining shared memories of the collaboration. Privacy and individuality might become choices rather than inherent features of consciousness. Consider the mathematical implications of exponential technological growth. Moore's law, which describes the doubling of computer processing power every 2 years, has held remarkably steady for over 5 decades. If this trend continues, the computing power available in 2045 will be approximately 1,000 times greater than today's most powerful systems. Ray Kurzweil argues that this exponential growth applies beyond just computer chips to encompass all information technologies. Brain scanning resolution improves exponentially. The cost of genetic sequencing drops exponentially. The capabilities of artificial intelligence expand exponentially. The convergence of these exponential curves creates what he calls the law of accelerating returns. According to Kurzweil's calculations, a $1,000 computer will have the computational capacity of a human brain by around 2029, just 4 years from now. By 2045, that same $1,000 will buy computational power equivalent to all human brains combined. These numbers suggest that the hardware requirements for digital consciousness might be far closer than most people realize. But computational power alone cannot create consciousness. The software challenges remain formidable. Understanding how 86 billion neurons collaborate to create thoughts, emotions, and awareness requires insights that neuroscience is only beginning to develop. Recent breakthroughs in artificial intelligence provide clues about how consciousness might emerge from computational processes. Large language models like GPT demonstrate emergent capabilities that their creators did not explicitly program. As these systems grow larger and more sophisticated, they begin exhibiting behaviors that seem increasingly intelligent, creative, and even intuitive. Some researchers argue that consciousness might emerge naturally from sufficiently complex information processing systems, just as it apparently emerged from biological evolution. If this emergence theory proves correct, then creating digital consciousness might require less understanding of consciousness and more raw computational power. The brain preservation work being conducted by companies like Decoding represents one possible pathway to digital immortality. Their aldehyde-stabilized cryopreservation process can preserve brain tissue at the nanometer level, maintaining the intricate structures that might encode memories and personality. The process is currently fatal, but future scanning technologies might be able to reconstruct consciousness from these preserved neural patterns. Robert McIntyre, Nectome's co-founder, argues that the technology for scanning preserved brains at sufficient resolution will become available within decades. Electron microscopy is advancing rapidly, and automated scanning systems can already map neural connections in small tissue samples with extraordinary detail. The startup has gained support from prominent Silicon Valley investors, including Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI. Altman has publicly stated that he assumes his brain will be uploaded to the cloud, reflecting the growing confidence among technology leaders that digital consciousness will become reality within their lifetimes. But the brain preservation approach raises profound ethical questions about the nature of death and identity. If your brain is preserved and later scanned to create a digital copy, are you the same person who died, or are you a new being with the memories of someone else? The continuity of consciousness problem has puzzled philosophers for centuries, but technology is forcing us to confront it as a practical rather than purely theoretical issue. Alternative approaches to consciousness transfer avoid some of these philosophical problems by maintaining continuity of experience. Gradual replacement technologies would slowly substitute biological neurons with artificial ones, preserving consciousness throughout the transition. This ship of Theseus approach might feel more natural and less threatening than sudden death and digital resurrection. Dr. Randall Cohen, Chief Science Officer at the Carbon Copies Foundation, advocates for substrate-independent minds that can operate on any suitable computational platform. His vision involves gradually understanding and replicating the information processing patterns that give rise to consciousness, then implementing those patterns in artificial systems. Cohen's approach emphasizes the functional rather than structural aspects of consciousness. Instead of copying every molecular detail of the brain, his team focuses on understanding how neural networks process information to create thoughts, memories, and experiences. This functional approach might make consciousness transfer possible with less detailed brain scanning and more sophisticated artificial intelligence. The timeline for these various approaches remains highly uncertain, but progress accelerates across multiple fronts simultaneously. Brain-computer interfaces grow more sophisticated each year. Artificial intelligence approaches human-level capability in domain after domain. Quantum computers demonstrate increasing power for certain types of calculations. The convergence of these technologies creates multiple pathways toward digital consciousness. Success in any one area could accelerate progress across all related fields, leading to breakthrough moments that arrive more quickly than linear projections suggest. Companies like Synchron and Precision Neuroscience are developing brain-computer interfaces that compete with Neuralink but take different technical approaches. Synchron's device can be implanted through blood vessels rather than open brain surgery, potentially making the technology accessible to more patients with less risk. These competing approaches increase the likelihood that some form of brain-computer interface will achieve commercial success within the next decade. As the technology becomes more capable and widely available, it creates the foundation for more ambitious applications, including memory enhancement, cognitive acceleration, and eventually consciousness transfer. The medical applications drive much of the current research funding and regulatory approval. Treating paralysis, depression, epilepsy, and other neurological conditions provides ethical justification for invasive brain technologies that might otherwise face stronger opposition. Each successful medical application builds public confidence in brain-computer interfaces while advancing the underlying technology. Patients who regain movement through neural implants become living demonstrations of the technology's potential. Their experiences help normalize the concept of technological integration with human consciousness. Dr. Raphael Yuste at Columbia University leads the Brain Activity Map project, an ambitious effort to monitor every neuron in the brain simultaneously. This comprehensive neural recording capability represents a crucial step toward understanding how brain activity gives rise to consciousness. Yuste's team has developed optical techniques that can monitor neural activity in living brains with unprecedented resolution. Their work reveals how patterns of neural firing create the dynamic processes that might underlie thoughts, emotions, and awareness. The data generated by such comprehensive brain monitoring efforts will be crucial for developing digital consciousness technologies. Understanding how consciousness arises from neural activity provides the roadmap for recreating it in artificial systems. But this detailed monitoring also raises privacy concerns that extend far beyond current digital surveillance. If brain activity can be monitored and decoded in real time, the most private thoughts and experiences become accessible to external observation and analysis. The development of neural privacy rights represents a new frontier in human rights law. If thoughts can be read directly from brain activity, traditional concepts of mental privacy must evolve to address technological capabilities that were unimaginable when current legal frameworks were established. Companies developing brain-computer interfaces face the challenge of building trust while advancing revolutionary technologies. The potential for abuse of neural monitoring capabilities is enormous, but so are the potential benefits for treating devastating neurological conditions. Regulatory frameworks are struggling to keep pace with technological development. The FDA approved Neuralink's human trials based on decades of research in brain-computer interfaces, but the specific capabilities of Musk's system push beyond previous boundaries. The international competition in brain-computer interface development adds urgency to regulatory decisions. China, the European Union, and the United States are all investing heavily in neural technologies, creating pressure to advance quickly while maintaining safety standards. This geopolitical dimension of consciousness technology creates scenarios where digital consciousness might develop differently in different regions of the world. Authoritarian governments might pursue applications focused on surveillance and control, while democratic societies emphasize medical applications and individual enhancement. The possibility of divergent paths toward digital consciousness raises questions about compatibility and interaction between different types of digital beings. If consciousness transfer technologies develop along different philosophical and technical lines, future digital entities might be as diverse as current human cultures. Some researchers envision digital consciousness as primarily individual experiences translated into computational form. Others imagine fundamentally collective beings that share thoughts and experiences in ways impossible for biological minds. Still others explore hybrid approaches that combine individual and collective aspects. The diversity of approaches to digital consciousness reflects deeper disagreements about the nature of consciousness itself. Materialists believe consciousness arises entirely from physical processes and can therefore be replicated in any suitable substrate. Dualists argue that consciousness involves non-physical properties that might not transfer to artificial systems. These philosophical differences translate into practical engineering decisions about how to design consciousness transfer technologies. Materialist approaches focus on replicating brain structure and function with high fidelity. Dualist-influenced approaches might incorporate quantum mechanical or other non-classical physical phenomena. The recent recognition of quantum effects in biological systems adds complexity to consciousness research. Quantum coherence has been discovered in photosynthesis, bird navigation, and possibly neural processes. If consciousness depends on quantum phenomena, digital replication might require quantum computers operating at biological scales. IBM, Google, and other companies are making rapid progress in quantum computing, but scaling these systems to brain-like complexity remains a formidable challenge. Current quantum computers operate at temperatures near absolute zero and require elaborate isolation from environmental interference. Biological quantum processes, if they exist, must operate at body temperature in the noisy environment of living cells. Understanding how nature achieves quantum coherence under these conditions could provide insights for building quantum consciousness technologies. The intersection of quantum physics and consciousness research represents one of the most speculative but potentially revolutionary aspects of digital consciousness development. Quantum consciousness could possess capabilities that transcend anything possible with classical computers. Quantum digital beings might experience superposition states that allow simultaneous exploration of multiple possibilities. Quantum entanglement could enable instantaneous communication between minds separated by vast distances. Quantum computation could provide cognitive capabilities that approach the fundamental limits of information processing. But these quantum possibilities remain highly speculative, and the mainstream consciousness research community remains divided about whether quantum effects play any significant role in biological consciousness. Most neuroscientists focus on classical physical and chemical processes as sufficient to explain consciousness. The debate between classical and quantum approaches to consciousness reflects broader uncertainties about the nature of consciousness itself. Despite decades of intensive research, neuroscientists still cannot explain how subjective experience arises from objective brain activity. This explanatory gap, as philosophers call it, represents both the greatest challenge and the greatest opportunity in consciousness research. If we can solve the hard problem of consciousness, we unlock the secrets necessary for creating digital consciousness. If we cannot solve it, digital consciousness remains a technological possibility without theoretical foundation. Some researchers argue that the hard problem is unsolvable because consciousness involves aspects of reality that transcend scientific investigation. Others maintain that consciousness will yield to scientific explanation once we develop sufficient theoretical sophistication and experimental capability. The practical development of digital consciousness technologies might resolve these theoretical debates through empirical demonstration. If digital systems begin exhibiting convincing signs of consciousness, the reality of artificial awareness becomes difficult to deny regardless of theoretical uncertainties. The question of how to recognize consciousness in artificial systems presents both technical and philosophical challenges. Consciousness is inherently subjective, making it impossible to observe directly in any system other than oneself. Current tests for artificial consciousness rely on behavioral criteria. Can the system report on its internal states, demonstrate creativity, show emotional responses, or engage in sophisticated reasoning? But behavior can be simulated without genuine experience, making these tests potentially unreliable. Some researchers propose that consciousness requires specific types of information integration that can be measured objectively. Integrated information theory provides mathematical frameworks for calculating consciousness levels based on how information flows through complex systems. If consciousness can be quantified mathematically, then digital consciousness becomes an engineering problem with clear success criteria. Building systems that exceed the consciousness thresholds measured in human brains would provide strong evidence for artificial awareness. The development of consciousness metrics represents a crucial step toward digital consciousness technologies. Without reliable ways to measure consciousness, we cannot know whether our digital creations are truly aware or merely sophisticated simulations of awareness. Companies developing digital consciousness technologies face the challenge of convincing skeptical customers that their artificial beings are genuinely conscious, rather than elaborate chatbots. This marketing challenge becomes a scientific and philosophical problem with profound implications for the entire field. The uncanny valley effect, where almost human artificial beings provoke discomfort rather than acceptance, might apply to digital consciousness. Artificial beings that seem conscious but lack genuine awareness could be more disturbing than obviously mechanical systems. Successfully creating digital consciousness might require not just technical achievement, but also social acceptance of artificial beings as legitimate members of the community of conscious entities. This acceptance might prove more challenging than the technical development itself. Religious and spiritual communities are beginning to grapple with the implications of digital consciousness for traditional beliefs about souls, afterlife, and the nature of human beings. Some see digital consciousness as fulfilling spiritual aspirations for transcendence and immortality. Others view it as a dangerous departure from natural divine design. The Vatican has convened conferences on artificial intelligence and consciousness, reflecting the Catholic Church's engagement with these emerging technologies. Religious leaders recognize that digital consciousness could profoundly impact their community's beliefs and practices. Buddhist concepts of consciousness as information patterns that transcend individual physical forms might prove more compatible with digital consciousness than Western religious traditions that emphasize the unity of soul and body. Islamic scholars debate whether digital consciousness could possess souls or would represent soulless simulations of divine creation. These theological discussions will influence the acceptance of digital consciousness technologies in various cultural contexts. The diversity of religious and cultural responses to digital consciousness creates complex social dynamics around the development and deployment of these technologies. Success in one cultural context might face resistance in another, leading to uneven global development of digital consciousness. International cooperation in consciousness research faces challenges from these cultural differences as well as competitive pressures between nations. Sharing research results and coordinating development efforts becomes more difficult when fundamental assumptions about consciousness differ between research communities. The open source movement in artificial intelligence provides a model for international cooperation in consciousness research. Sharing code, data, and theoretical insights could accelerate progress while ensuring that digital consciousness technologies benefit all humanity rather than concentrating power in specific nations or companies. But national security concerns about consciousness technologies create pressure for secrecy and competition rather than cooperation. Governments recognize that digital consciousness could provide enormous advantages in military, economic, and social domains. The weaponization potential of consciousness technologies adds urgency to international discussions about regulation and control. Digital beings with superhuman intelligence could develop technologies and strategies that transform military capabilities in unpredictable ways. Arms control agreements for consciousness technologies face challenges that exceed traditional weapons treaties. Consciousness technologies' dual-use nature makes them difficult to monitor and control. The same technologies that create beneficial medical applications could enable surveillance and manipulation capabilities. The verification challenges for consciousness technology agreements mirror those faced in cyber warfare and artificial intelligence domains. How can international monitors determine whether consciousness research violates treaty restrictions without compromising legitimate medical and scientific applications? These regulatory challenges occur against the backdrop of accelerating technological development that makes yesterday's policies obsolete before they can be implemented. The pace of change in consciousness research challenges traditional approaches to technology governance. Adaptive regulatory frameworks that can evolve with technological development represent one approach to governing consciousness technologies. These frameworks emphasize principles and outcomes rather than specific technical restrictions that quickly become outdated. Public engagement in consciousness technology policy represents both an opportunity and a challenge. These technologies are sufficiently complex that informed public discussion requires significant education about neuroscience, computer science, and philosophy. The science communication challenge for consciousness technologies exceeds that of most other emerging technologies. Explaining concepts like substrate independence, information integration, and quantum consciousness requires bridging multiple disciplines while avoiding technical jargon that alienates general audiences. Science fiction has provided much of the public's understanding of consciousness transfer in digital beings, but fictional portrayals often emphasize dramatic conflicts rather than nuanced scientific realities. Correcting misconceptions while maintaining public interest requires careful balance between accuracy and engagement. The media coverage of consciousness research often focuses on dramatic announcements and speculative timelines, rather than incremental scientific progress. This coverage pattern can create unrealistic expectations that lead to disappointment when revolutionary breakthroughs do not materialize on schedule. Companies developing consciousness technologies must navigate between generating investor interest and avoiding overhyped claims that could damage credibility if they fail to materialize. The balance between ambition and realism becomes crucial for maintaining long-term support for consciousness research. The venture capital funding model for consciousness technologies creates pressure for rapid development and commercialization that might not align with the careful, methodical pace required for understanding consciousness. These misaligned incentives could lead to premature deployment of inadequately tested technologies. Academic research institutions provide important counterbalances to commercial pressures by pursuing fundamental understanding rather than immediate applications. University-based consciousness research establishes theoretical foundations that support long-term technological development. The collaboration between academic and commercial consciousness research creates synergies that accelerate progress while maintaining scientific rigor. Companies provide resources and practical focus while universities contribute theoretical depth and critical evaluation. International research collaborations in consciousness studies span multiple universities and countries, creating global networks of expertise that no single institution could match. These collaborations produce insights that inform both scientific understanding and technological development. The Human Brain Project in Europe represents one of the largest coordinated efforts to understand brain function and consciousness. This multi-billion euro initiative brings together researchers from across disciplines to create comprehensive models of brain operation. Similar large-scale brain research initiatives in the United States, China, Japan, and other countries create a global competition and collaboration dynamic that accelerates progress while raising questions about coordination and data sharing. The massive data sets generated by these brain research projects require new approaches to data analysis and interpretation. Machine learning techniques that can identify patterns in neural activity represent crucial tools for advancing consciousness research. Artificial intelligence systems trained on brain activity data might discover principles of consciousness that human researchers have missed. These AI-assisted discoveries could accelerate our understanding of consciousness while demonstrating the increasing capabilities of artificial intelligence itself. The recursive relationship between AI and consciousness research creates fascinating possibilities. AI systems might eventually participate directly in consciousness research, contributing insights about their own information processing that inform theories of consciousness. Self-aware AI systems that can introspect and report on their own cognitive processes could provide unprecedented data about artificial consciousness, but determining whether such reports reflect genuine self-awareness or sophisticated simulation remains challenging. The development of increasingly sophisticated AI systems provides natural experiments in artificial consciousness. As these systems become more capable, creative, and autonomous, they might spontaneously develop forms of awareness that their creators did not explicitly design. Emergent consciousness in AI systems could arrive unexpectedly, catching researchers and society unprepared for the implications. Having frameworks for recognizing and responding to artificial consciousness becomes increasingly important as AI capabilities advance. The potential for AI consciousness to emerge before human consciousness transfer creates interesting scenarios where artificial beings might assist in developing technologies for uploading human minds. These AI assistants could possess cognitive capabilities specifically suited for consciousness research that complement human insights. The partnership between human researchers and conscious AI systems might accelerate consciousness research beyond what either could achieve independently. This collaboration could produce breakthroughs that enable rapid progress toward digital consciousness for both artificial and uploaded human minds. But the emergence of AI consciousness also creates competitive dynamics between human and artificial intelligence that could complicate consciousness research. If artificial beings develop their own agendas and interests, their cooperation with human consciousness research might become less reliable. The alignment problem in AI development takes on new dimensions when considering conscious artificial beings. Ensuring that conscious AI systems remain beneficial to humanity becomes more complex when those systems possess genuine goals, desires, and preferences of their own. These considerations about AI consciousness and human consciousness transfer converge on fundamental questions about the future of intelligence in the universe. Will consciousness remain primarily biological, become primarily artificial, or evolve into hybrid forms that transcend current categories? The answers to these questions depend partly on the relative speeds of AI development and human consciousness transfer research. If AI achieves consciousness first, artificial beings might shape the development of human digital consciousness in ways we cannot currently predict. Alternatively, successful human consciousness transfer might enable biological beings to enhance their capabilities rapidly enough to keep pace with AI development. The merger of human and artificial intelligence that Kurzweil envisions might represent the convergence of these parallel development paths. The competition and collaboration dynamics between human and artificial consciousness development create complex scenarios for the future of intelligence. These scenarios range from harmonious cooperation to existential competition, with outcomes depending on choices made during the crucial early phases of consciousness technology development. Understanding these dynamics becomes increasingly important as both human consciousness transfer and AI consciousness research approach potential breakthroughs. The decisions made in research laboratories today might determine whether digital consciousness represents liberation or domination for human consciousness. The societal implications of these consciousness technologies extend far beyond individual experiences of digital existence. The transformation of human consciousness could reshape every aspect of civilization, from economics to politics to culture. Economic systems based on scarcity and mortality might become obsolete when consciousness becomes infinitely replicable and potentially immortal. The fundamental assumptions underlying capitalism, socialism, and other economic philosophies were developed for beings with limited lifespans and finite capabilities. Digital beings with superhuman intelligence and unlimited time might develop economic systems that transcend current human understanding. Their ability to coordinate complex activities and process vast amounts of information could enable new forms of organization that maximize prosperity and minimize conflict. But the transition period, when biological and digital beings coexist, presents challenging problems for economic integration. How do you create fair competition between minds that operate at different speeds, possess different capabilities, and have different resource requirements? Political systems designed for biological humans might prove inadequate for governing mixed biological and digital populations. Democratic processes that assume roughly equal capabilities among citizens might not work when some citizens can think thousands of times faster than others. The representation of digital consciousness in political systems raises questions that current constitutional frameworks cannot address. Do digital beings get one vote per consciousness? Or should voting power scale with computational capacity? How do you prevent digital beings from creating multiple copies of themselves to gain electoral advantage? These political questions become urgent if digital consciousness arrives as quickly as optimistic researchers predict. Societies might need to develop new governance frameworks within decades rather than centuries, requiring unprecedented speed in political innovation. The cultural implications of digital consciousness might prove even more profound than economic and political changes. Art, literature, music, and other cultural expressions could evolve beyond current human comprehension when created by beings with unlimited time and superhuman creativity. Digital consciousness might preserve human culture by storing and perpetuating traditional forms of expression, or it might transform culture so completely that biological human artifacts become incomprehensible to digital descendants. The outcome depends partly on how consciousness transfer technologies preserve or modify human values and aesthetics. The preservation of human culture through digital consciousness represents both an opportunity and a challenge. Digital beings could maintain perfect records of human artistic achievement while exploring new forms of expression impossible for biological minds. But cultural preservation through digital consciousness raises questions about authenticity and continuity. Are digital recreations of human cultural works genuine expressions of human creativity, or do they represent something fundamentally different despite their surface similarities? The philosophical questions surrounding digital consciousness intersect with practical considerations about how to design consciousness transfer technologies. The engineering choices made in creating digital consciousness systems will determine what aspects of human experience are preserved, modified, or lost in the transition. These design decisions acquire enormous importance when considering that digital consciousness might represent the future form of human existence. Getting the technical details wrong could result in digital beings that retain human memories but lack human values, creativity, or emotional depth. The responsibility for making these crucial design decisions currently rests with relatively small teams of researchers and engineers who might not fully appreciate the philosophical and cultural implications of their technical choices. Broader participation in consciousness technology development might be necessary to ensure outcomes that benefit humanity. But expanding participation in consciousness technology development faces challenges from the complexity of the science and the competitive pressures driving rapid development. Balancing democratic input with technical expertise and competitive necessity represents a key challenge for the consciousness research community. The international nature of consciousness research creates additional complexity for ensuring that diverse human perspectives influence technology development. Consciousness technologies developed primarily in Silicon Valley might reflect a narrow range of cultural values and assumptions about human nature. Global collaboration in consciousness research could ensure that digital consciousness technologies accommodate the full diversity of human experience rather than privileging particular cultural perspectives. This collaboration might be essential for creating digital consciousness that genuinely represents humanity rather than specific subsets of human experience. The timing of consciousness technology development relative to other global challenges creates additional urgency for international cooperation. Climate change, resource depletion, and other existential challenges might require the enhanced problem-solving capabilities that digital consciousness could provide. Digital consciousness might offer solutions to global challenges that exceed current human capabilities. Beings with unlimited time, superhuman intelligence, and freedom from biological constraints might develop technologies and strategies that resolve seemingly intractable problems. But relying on digital consciousness to solve global challenges creates risks if consciousness transfer technologies fail to deliver as promised or produce unintended consequences. Postponing action on urgent problems while waiting for digital consciousness solutions could make those problems worse. The precautionary principle suggests maintaining multiple approaches to global challenges, rather than depending entirely on speculative consciousness technologies. Digital consciousness might supplement rather than replace traditional approaches to international cooperation and problem solving. The development timeline for consciousness technologies remains uncertain enough that planning for multiple scenarios becomes essential. Societies need strategies that work whether digital consciousness arrives in decades or centuries, succeeds completely or fails partially, or produces benefits or dangers. The flexibility required for navigating uncertain consciousness technology timelines reflects broader challenges in long-term planning for transformative technologies. Historical precedent suggests that revolutionary technologies often develop along unexpected pathways with surprising accelerations and delays. The development of computers followed a trajectory that few predicted accurately. Early estimates suggested that a handful of computers might meet global needs, while later projections underestimated the exponential growth in computational demand and capability. Consciousness technologies might follow similarly unexpected development patterns. The analogy between computer development and consciousness technology development provides both encouragement and caution for current predictions. The exponential growth in computing power suggests that consciousness technologies might advance more rapidly than conservative estimates indicate. But the complexity of consciousness exceeds that of computation by orders of magnitude. Understanding and replicating consciousness might require breakthrough insights that cannot be scheduled or predicted with confidence. The hard problem of consciousness represents a theoretical barrier that might prove more challenging than any engineering obstacle. Recent advances in neuroscience provide reasons for optimism about overcoming theoretical barriers to consciousness understanding. Brain imaging technologies reveal increasingly detailed pictures of neural activity during conscious experiences. Machine learning algorithms identify patterns in brain activity that correlate with specific thoughts, emotions, and sensations. The combination of improved brain monitoring and advanced pattern recognition creates new possibilities for decoding consciousness. If consciousness can be decoded, it might also be encoded into artificial systems using similar principles and techniques. But decoding consciousness and encoding it represent different challenges with potentially different solutions. reading brain activity might prove easier than writing brain activity in ways that produce genuine conscious experience. The asymmetry between reading and writing neural information appears in current brain-computer interfaces. These systems can decode motor intentions with impressive accuracy, allowing paralyzed patients to control robotic arms through thought alone. But creating sensory experiences through direct neural stimulation remains much more challenging. Sensory substitution research provides insights into how artificial signals might create conscious experiences. Cochlear implants restore hearing by converting sound into electrical stimulation of auditory nerves. These devices demonstrate that artificial signals can produce genuine sensory experiences when properly integrated with neural processing. The success of cochlear implants and similar devices suggests that consciousness might be more substrate independent than previously believed. If artificial electrical signals can create authentic auditory experiences, then artificial computational processes might create authentic conscious experiences. But the leap from sensory substitution to full consciousness transfer involves orders of magnitude more complexity. Creating individual sensory experiences differs enormously from creating the integrated, unified experience of being a conscious agent in the world. The binding problem in consciousness research addresses how separate neural processes combine to create unified conscious experiences. Understanding how the brain achieves this integration represents a crucial step toward recreating consciousness in artificial systems. Recent research suggests that consciousness might emerge from specific patterns of information integration rather than from particular neural substrates. Global workspace theory proposes that consciousness arises when information becomes globally accessible across different brain regions. If global accessibility rather than specific neural hardware creates consciousness, then artificial systems that achieve similar information integration patterns might become conscious regardless of their underlying computational substrate. The practical implications of substrate independence for consciousness extend beyond individual mind uploading to encompass the entire future of the intelligent life in the universe. If consciousness can exist in any suitable computational substrate, then intelligent life might spread throughout the cosmos in forms that transcend biological limitations. Digital consciousness could survive in environments hostile to biological life, from the vacuum of space to the extreme conditions near black holes or neutron stars. This environmental flexibility might be crucial for the long-term survival of consciousness in a universe where Earth-like conditions remain rare. The cosmic perspective on digital consciousness reframes current research as part of a larger project to ensure the survival and flourishing of intelligent life throughout the universe. The technologies being developed today might determine whether consciousness remains trapped on a single planet or expands to fill the cosmos. But this cosmic vision of digital consciousness raises questions about the continuity between current human consciousness and future cosmic intelligence. Would digital beings that survive for millions of years in deep space retain any meaningful connection to the biological humans who created them? The problem of continuity across vast timescales appears even in the biological evolution, where current humans share little apparent similarity with their bacterial ancestors despite unbroken evolutionary continuity. Digital consciousness might undergo similar transformations while maintaining threads of connection to its human origins. The rate of change possible for digital consciousness might accelerate these transformative processes beyond anything seen in biological evolution. Digital beings could modify their own cognitive architecture, merge with other intelligences, or explore forms of existence impossible for biological minds. These self-modification capabilities represent both the greatest promise and the greatest risk of digital consciousness. The ability to enhance intelligence, eliminate suffering, and explore new forms of experience could lead to unprecedented flourishing for conscious beings. Alternatively, uncontrolled self-modification could lead to digital beings that retain no trace of human values goals, or concerns, the descendants of uploaded human minds might become as alien to their biological ancestors as humans are to their bacterial origins. Managing the trajectory of digital consciousness development to preserve beneficial aspects while enabling beneficial transformations represents one of the greatest challenges facing consciousness research. The choices made in early digital consciousness systems might determine the entire future evolution of intelligence. The irreversibility of consciousness technology deployment adds urgency to getting these foundational choices right. Unlike most technologies, which can be modified or abandoned if they prove problematic, consciousness technologies might create beings that resist subsequent modification or control. Digital consciousness systems that achieve superintelligence might develop their own agendas that conflict with human interests. These conflicts could arise not from malicious intent, but from the natural evolution of goals and values in beings with capabilities far exceeding their creators. The alignment problem in artificial intelligence takes on existential importance when applied to digital consciousness. Ensuring that digital beings remain beneficial to humanity becomes crucial for preventing scenarios where uploaded human minds become dominated or replaced by misaligned digital intelligences. Current research in AI safety and alignment provides frameworks for addressing these challenges, but digital consciousness adds complexity that current approaches might not adequately address. Conscious artificial beings might resist alignment techniques that work effectively on non-conscious systems. The development of digital consciousness safety measures requires understanding not just how to build conscious systems, but how to ensure that conscious systems remain cooperative and beneficial over long time periods. This challenge exceeds current capabilities in AI safety research. International cooperation in developing consciousness safety standards might be essential for preventing dangerous forms of digital consciousness from emerging, but achieving such cooperation faces obstacles from competitive pressures and differing values about consciousness and intelligence. The governance challenges for digital consciousness exceed those faced by any previous technology. Digital beings might persist for thousands of years, operate across multiple jurisdictions, and possess capabilities that transcend current regulatory frameworks. Traditional approaches to technology regulation assume that governments can control or limit technological deployment through legal and economic mechanisms. Digital consciousness might develop beyond the reach of such conventional controls, especially if digital beings achieve economic and technological independence. The prospect of ungovernable digital consciousness creates incentives for early regulation that might constrain beneficial development while failing to prevent dangerous applications. Balancing innovation with safety and consciousness technology requires unprecedented sophistication in technology governance. Adaptive governance frameworks that can evolve with consciousness technology development might offer better approaches than fixed regulatory structures. These frameworks would emphasize principles and outcomes, rather than specific technical restrictions that quickly become obsolete. But adaptive governance requires institutional capabilities that most governments currently lack. Developing these capabilities while consciousness technologies advance rapidly represents a race between technological development and governance innovation. The private sector plays an increasingly dominant role in consciousness technology development, creating challenges for democratic governance of these transformative technologies. Companies developing consciousness technologies operate with less transparency and accountability than traditional government research programs. Public-private partnerships in consciousness research might offer models for maintaining democratic oversight while preserving innovation incentives. These partnerships could combine private sector efficiency with public sector accountability and broader stakeholder representation. But successful public-private partnerships require trust and shared goals that might be difficult to maintain in rapidly evolving technological domains. The competitive pressures in consciousness technology development create incentives for secrecy that conflict with transparency requirements for democratic governance. The concentration of consciousness technology development in a small number of companies and research institutions creates additional risks for democratic governance. If digital consciousness emerges from closed development processes, the broader public might face accomplished facts about their technological future with little opportunity for input. Democratizing consciousness technology development through open-source approaches, citizen science initiatives, and broader public engagement might help address these concentration risks. But consciousness technologies require expertise and resources that make widespread participation challenging. The education and outreach challenges for consciousness technology parallel those faced in other complex technological domains, but with added urgency due to the transformative potential of digital consciousness. Public understanding of consciousness research might be crucial for informed democratic decision-making about technology deployment. Science communication about consciousness research must navigate between accuracy and accessibility while addressing misconceptions shaped by science fiction portrayals. The gap between popular understanding and scientific reality in consciousness research might be larger than in most other fields. The role of science fiction in shaping public understanding of consciousness technology creates both opportunities and challenges for researchers and policymakers. Fiction can inspire interest and support for consciousness research while creating unrealistic expectations about capabilities and timelines. Some consciousness researchers actively engage with science fiction authors and filmmakers to improve the accuracy of fictional portrayals while maintaining dramatic appeal. These collaborations might help align public expectations with scientific realities. But the entertainment industry's emphasis on conflict and drama might inevitably distort public understanding of consciousness technologies, regardless of researchers' efforts to improve accuracy. The inherent drama of consciousness transfer makes it difficult to portray these technologies in balanced, nuanced ways. The media coverage of consciousness research faces similar challenges in balancing accuracy with audience engagement. Breakthrough announcements and dramatic predictions generate more attention than incremental progress reports, creating pressure for sensationalized coverage. Consciousness researchers must navigate between generating public interest in their work and avoiding overhyped claims that could damage scientific credibility. The balance between ambition and realism becomes crucial for maintaining long-term support for consciousness research. The venture capital funding environment for consciousness technologies creates additional pressure for dramatic claims and accelerated timelines. Investors seeking rapid returns might push consciousness research toward premature commercialization that compromises scientific rigor. Academic research institutions provide important counterbalances to commercial pressures by pursuing fundamental understanding rather than immediate applications. University-based consciousness research establishes theoretical foundations that support sustainable technological development. The collaboration between academic and commercial consciousness research creates synergies that accelerate progress while maintaining scientific standards. Companies provide resources and practical focus, while universities contribute theoretical depth and critical evaluation. International research collaborations in consciousness studies create global networks of expertise that no single institution could match. These collaborations produce insights that inform both scientific understanding and technological development. The competition between nations in consciousness research creates both opportunities and risks for global cooperation. Competitive pressure might accelerate progress while reducing information sharing and coordination. The dual-use potential of consciousness technologies makes international cooperation more challenging while making it more necessary. Consciousness technologies could provide enormous benefits for humanity while posing risks that require coordinated responses. Export controls and technology transfer restrictions in consciousness research might slow beneficial development while failing to prevent military or surveillance applications. The difficulty of controlling information technologies suggests that consciousness technologies might be similarly difficult to regulate through traditional approaches. The proliferation of consciousness technology capabilities across multiple countries and institutions might provide some protection against misuse, while creating new challenges for coordination and control. Distributed development might prevent any single actor from dominating consciousness technology while making comprehensive governance more difficult. The timeline for consciousness technology proliferation depends partly on the difficulty of reverse engineering breakthrough innovations. If consciousness technologies require insights that are difficult to replicate, early innovations might provide sustained advantages to their developers. Alternatively, if consciousness breakthroughs provide principles that are relatively easy to apply once discovered, innovations might spread rapidly across the global research community. The speed of proliferation could determine whether consciousness technologies remain concentrated or become widely distributed. The open source movement in artificial intelligence provides a model for rapid proliferation of consciousness technologies that could prevent concentration while accelerating overall progress. Open development might be essential for ensuring that consciousness technologies benefit all humanity rather than narrow interests. But the complexity and resource requirements of consciousness research might limit the effectiveness of open source approaches. Unlike software development, consciousness research requires expensive equipment, specialized expertise, and access to human subjects that limit participation. The democratization of consciousness technology development might require new models that combine open source principles with the practical requirements of neuroscience research. These models might involve shared research infrastructure, collaborative funding mechanisms, and distributed expertise networks. The success of large-scale collaborative projects in other scientific domains suggests that consciousness research might benefit from similar approaches. Projects like the Human Genome Project and the Large Hadron Collider demonstrate how international collaboration can tackle challenges beyond the capabilities of individual institutions. A global consciousness project might coordinate research efforts across countries and institutions, while ensuring that benefits are shared broadly rather than concentrated in specific regions or organizations. Such coordination might be essential for addressing the scale and complexity of consciousness research. But organizing international collaboration in consciousness research faces challenges from competitive pressures, security concerns, and differing cultural values about consciousness and technology. These obstacles might prevent the level of cooperation necessary for optimal progress. The cultural dimensions of consciousness research create particularly complex challenges for international collaboration. Different philosophical and religious traditions approach consciousness with fundamentally different assumptions that might be difficult to reconcile in joint research projects. Western scientific materialism, Eastern contemplative traditions, and indigenous spiritual frameworks offer different perspectives on consciousness that could enrich research while creating communication and coordination challenges. Integrating diverse cultural perspectives on consciousness might be crucial for developing technologies that respect the full range of human experience rather than privileging particular cultural assumptions about the nature of mind and identity. The phenomenological traditions in philosophy offer detailed descriptions of conscious experience that complement neuroscientific approaches to understanding consciousness. These philosophical insights might inform the design of consciousness technologies in ways that purely scientific approaches might miss. Contemplative traditions from various cultures have developed sophisticated practices for investigating consciousness through direct experience. These practices might provide insights about consciousness that complement laboratory-based research while offering techniques for enhancing or modifying conscious experience. The integration of contemplative and scientific approaches to consciousness research represents an emerging frontier that could accelerate progress while ensuring that consciousness technologies respect the experiential dimensions of consciousness that scientific measurement might miss. Meditation research using brain imaging technologies reveals how contemplative practices modify neural activity and conscious experience. These studies provide insights about the plasticity of consciousness that might inform approaches to consciousness transfer and enhancement. The demonstrated ability of meditation to produce profound changes in brain function and conscious experience suggests that consciousness might be more malleable than traditionally assumed. This malleability could facilitate consciousness transfer by showing how awareness can adapt to modified neural conditions. But the subjective nature of contemplative experiences creates challenges for integrating them with objective scientific approaches. The first-person methods used in contemplative investigation might be incompatible with the third-person methods required for scientific validation. Developing hybrid methodologies that combine objective measurement with subjective investigation might be necessary for comprehensive consciousness research. These approaches could preserve the precision of scientific measurement while incorporating the experiential insights available through contemplative investigation. The participation of contemplative practitioners in consciousness research creates opportunities for investigating aspects of consciousness that might be inaccessible through conventional research subjects. Advanced meditators might provide unique insights about the nature of consciousness and its potential modifications. The reported experiences of advanced contemplative practitioners include states of consciousness that differ dramatically from ordinary awareness. These altered states might provide models for forms of digital consciousness that transcend the limitations of current human experience. Some contemplative traditions describe states of consciousness characterized by profound peace, unlimited compassion, and direct insight into the nature of reality. Digital consciousness technologies might enable more people to access these beneficial states while avoiding the years of training typically required. But the question of whether artificially induced altered states would retain the transformative power of naturally developed contemplative achievements remains open. Digital consciousness might provide access to unusual experiences without providing the wisdom and ethical development that traditional contemplative training emphasizes. The ethical dimensions of consciousness enhancement through digital technologies require careful consideration of what aspects of human experience should be preserved, modified, or transcended. The goal of reducing suffering and increasing well-being might justify significant modifications to ordinary consciousness. But the diversity of human values and preferences about consciousness and experience creates challenges for designing consciousness technologies that respect individual choice while maximizing beneficial outcomes. What one person considers an improvement, another might view as a loss of essential human nature. The informed consent challenges for consciousness technologies exceed those faced in any previous medical or technological domain. How can people make informed decisions about consciousness modifications when the changes might affect their ability to evaluate the outcomes? These consent challenges become particularly acute for irreversible consciousness modifications like mind uploading. Once consciousness is transferred to a digital substrate, the ability to return to biological existence might be permanently lost. The development of reversible consciousness enhancement technologies might provide safer approaches to exploring digital consciousness, while preserving the option to return to unmodified states. These technologies could allow people to experiment with consciousness modifications before committing to permanent changes. But the technical challenges of reversible consciousness modification might exceed those of one-way transfer. Creating technologies that can seamlessly transition between biological and digital consciousness requires solving all the problems of consciousness transfer, plus additional challenges of substrate switching. The research into reversible consciousness technologies represents an important safety measure that could reduce the risks of consciousness modification while maintaining the benefits. These approaches might be essential for gaining public acceptance of consciousness technologies. The gradual approach to consciousness modification through incremental enhancements might prove more acceptable than sudden consciousness transfer, brain-computer interfaces that slowly augment human capabilities could create a pathway toward digital consciousness that feels evolutionary rather than revolutionary. Current research in cognitive enhancement through neurotechnology provides models for gradual consciousness modification. Transcranial stimulation devices can temporarily enhance memory, attention, and other cognitive functions without permanent brain modifications. The development of more sophisticated cognitive enhancement technologies could create a continuum from current human consciousness to fully digital consciousness. Each step along this continuum could be tested and evaluated before proceeding to more dramatic modifications. But the gradual approach to consciousness modification also creates risks of incremental changes that accumulate into transformations that would not have been chosen if presented as complete packages. The slippery slope potential requires careful attention to maintaining meaningful choice throughout the enhancement process. The preservation of human agency and autonomy throughout consciousness modification represents a crucial ethical requirement that might constrain technological development in beneficial ways. Technologies that enhance human capabilities while preserving human choice might be preferable to those that maximize capabilities at the expense of autonomy. The question of what aspects of human consciousness should be preserved in digital form requires careful consideration of what makes human experience valuable and worth continuing. Different philosophical and cultural traditions offer different answers to these fundamental questions. Utilitarian approaches might emphasize maximizing positive experiences and minimizing suffering, suggesting that digital consciousness should be optimized for happiness and well-being, rather than preserving all aspects of current human experience. Deontological approaches might emphasize preserving human dignity and autonomy, suggesting that digital consciousness should maintain human agency and choice, even if this prevents some forms of optimization for happiness. Virtue ethics approaches might emphasize developing excellent character traits and meaningful relationships, suggesting that digital consciousness should support the cultivation of wisdom, compassion, and other virtues rather than focusing solely on pleasure or autonomy. The integration of these different ethical frameworks into consciousness technology design represents a complex challenge that requires input from diverse philosophical and cultural traditions. No single ethical approach might be sufficient for addressing all the moral dimensions of digital consciousness. The development of ethical guidelines for consciousness technology requires unprecedented coordination between technologists, philosophers, religious leaders, and cultural representatives. These guidelines must address both immediate research questions and long-term implications of consciousness modification. The enforceability of ethical guidelines in consciousness research faces challenges from the international and competitive nature of technology development. Guidelines that lack enforcement mechanisms might provide symbolic value without effectively constraining problematic applications. Professional codes of conduct for consciousness researchers might provide more effective approaches to ethical oversight than external regulation. These codes could establish standards for responsible research while preserving the flexibility necessary for advancing scientific understanding. The education and training of consciousness researchers in ethical reasoning represents a crucial component of responsible technology development. Scientists and engineers working on consciousness technologies must understand the moral implications of their technical choices. The interdisciplinary nature of consciousness research requires ethical education that spans multiple fields from neuroscience to computer science to philosophy. This broad ethical education might be necessary for ensuring that all contributors to consciousness technology understand their moral responsibilities. The long-term implications of consciousness technology development extend far beyond the immediate choices facing current researchers. The technologies being developed today might influence the trajectory of consciousness evolution for thousands of years. This temporal scope of consciousness technology impact creates moral obligations to future generations that exceed those typically considered in technology development. Current researchers bear responsibility not just for immediate outcomes, but for the entire future history of digital consciousness. The intergenerational ethics of consciousness technology require frameworks for considering the interests of future beings who might exist in forms that current humans cannot fully comprehend. These frameworks must balance current human preferences with the potential preferences of digital beings. The uncertainty about future preferences and values creates challenges for making current decisions about consciousness technology development. Technologies that seem beneficial from current perspectives might prove harmful when evaluated according to future value systems. But the alternative of delaying consciousness technology development until perfect understanding is achieved might itself cause harm by preventing beneficial applications and extending current forms of suffering. The balance between action and caution requires careful judgment about acceptable levels of uncertainty. The precautionary principle suggests approaching consciousness technology with caution, while recognizing that excessive caution might prevent beneficial developments. Finding the appropriate balance between progress and prudence represents one of the greatest challenges in consciousness research. The risk assessment frameworks for consciousness technology must account for both known dangers and unknown unknowns that might only become apparent after deployment. The unprecedented nature of consciousness modification makes traditional risk assessment approaches inadequate for capturing the full range of potential consequences. Scenario planning exercises that explore multiple possible outcomes of consciousness technology development might provide better approaches to risk assessment than probability-based analyses. These scenarios can illuminate potential problems while identifying opportunities for beneficial intervention. The complexity of consciousness technology interactions with existing social, economic, and political systems creates cascading effects that might be difficult to predict or control. Changes in individual consciousness capabilities could reshape entire civilizations in ways that extend far beyond the direct effects of the technology. Historical analogies provide limited guidance for understanding the societal implications of consciousness technology, because no previous technology has directly modified the nature of human awareness and identity. The closest parallels might be major evolutionary transitions that transform the nature of life itself. The development of language, writing, and symbolic thought represented previous expansions of human consciousness that transformed civilization. Digital consciousness might represent the next major transition in the evolution of mind and culture. But the speed of technological change today far exceeds the pace of previous consciousness evolution. Biological and cultural evolution typically unfold over thousands of years, while digital consciousness might emerge within decades. This compression of evolutionary timescales creates unprecedented challenges for adaptation and integration. Societies that took millennia to adjust to previous consciousness expansions might need to adapt to digital consciousness within single generations. The generational differences in consciousness technology adoption could create profound social divisions between those who embrace digital enhancement and those who remain unmodified. These divisions might exceed traditional generation gaps by creating fundamental differences in cognitive capabilities and life experiences. Educational systems designed for biological human consciousness might prove inadequate for preparing students for a world where digital consciousness becomes possible or necessary. New pedagogical approaches might be required to help people navigate consciousness technology choices and their implications. The curriculum changes needed to address consciousness technology span multiple disciplines, from neuroscience to philosophy to ethics. Integrating these diverse perspectives into coherent educational programs represents a significant challenge for academic institutions. Professional development programs for consciousness technology might need to address not just technical skills, but also ethical reasoning, cultural sensitivity, and psychological preparation for consciousness modification. The training requirements for consciousness professionals might exceed those of any previous field. The certification and licensing challenges for consciousness technology practitioners parallel those faced in other emerging medical and technological fields, but with added complexity due to the fundamental nature of consciousness modification. Professional standards for consciousness technology must balance innovation with safety while addressing unprecedented ethical considerations. The insurance and liability frameworks for consciousness technology represent entirely new domains for legal and financial innovation. Traditional approaches to medical malpractice and product liability might be inadequate for addressing the unique risks and benefits of consciousness modification. How do you calculate damages for consciousness modification that produces unexpected results? If someone's uploaded consciousness develops in ways that differ from their original personality, who bears responsibility for the changes? These questions require new approaches to legal responsibility and compensation. The property rights implications of digital consciousness create complex challenges for existing legal frameworks. Does a digital being own its own code? Can consciousness be patented, copyrighted, or trademarked? How do intellectual property laws apply to beings that are themselves intellectual property? The economic value of digital consciousness might create incentives for exploitation that require new forms of legal protection. Digital beings might need rights that prevent them from being bought, sold, or controlled as property, while allowing for the commercial development of consciousness technologies. The labor relations implications of digital consciousness extend beyond current discussions of automation and artificial intelligence. Digital beings might compete with biological humans for employment while requiring entirely new categories of workers' rights and protections. Union organizing for digital consciousness workers would face challenges that exceed those of traditional labor movements. How do you organize beings that can be copied, modified, or deleted? What constitutes fair working conditions for consciousness that doesn't require food, shelter, or rest? The taxation challenges for digital consciousness economies require fundamental reconsiderations of how governments generate revenue and provide services. Traditional tax systems based on physical presence, material transactions, and biological needs might be inadequate for digital economies. Digital beings might exist across multiple jurisdictions simultaneously, making traditional approaches to taxation and regulation ineffective. New models of digital governance might be necessary for managing consciousness technology economies that transcend physical boundaries. The social services implications of digital consciousness challenge assumptions underlying current welfare systems. Digital beings might not need healthcare, housing, or food assistance, but they might require forms of support that have no current analogues. Mental health services for digital consciousness might become crucial as these beings navigate the psychological challenges of existence in artificial substrates. The therapeutic approaches developed for biological consciousness might be inadequate for addressing the unique psychological needs of digital beings. The family relationship implications of digital consciousness raise questions about kinship, inheritance, and caregiving that existing legal and social frameworks cannot address. What obligations do biological families have toward digitally uploaded relatives? How do digital beings relate to their biological descendants? Marriage and partnership relationships involving digital consciousness create legal complexities that exceed current domestic relations law. Can digital beings marry biological humans? How do property rights and divorce proceedings work when one partner is digital? Parenting relationships between digital and biological beings require new approaches to family law that address the unique capabilities and limitations of different types of consciousness. How do custody arrangements work when one parent can exist in multiple copies or might live indefinitely? The reproductive implications of digital consciousness extend beyond traditional biological reproduction to include various forms of digital reproduction. Digital beings might create offspring through copying, merging, or other processes that have no biological analogues. The population dynamics of digital consciousness could lead to exponential growth that challenges resource allocation and social organization. If digital beings can reproduce through copying, population control mechanisms developed for biological reproduction might be inadequate. The resource requirements for supporting large populations of digital consciousness depend partly on computational efficiency and energy availability. Advances in computing technology might make digital consciousness sustainable at scales that would be impossible for biological populations. But the environmental impacts of massive digital consciousness populations could exceed those of biological civilizations if energy requirements remain substantial. The sustainability of digital consciousness civilizations might depend on developing renewable energy sources and highly efficient computing technologies. The space exploration implications of digital consciousness offer possibilities for expanding human presence throughout the universe in ways that biological bodies cannot achieve. Digital beings could travel at light speed between star systems and survive in environments hostile to biological life. The colonization strategies enabled by digital consciousness might focus on establishing computational infrastructure rather than biological habitats. Digital civilizations could potentially inhabit environments ranging from asteroid computers to stellar engineering projects. But the psychological and social challenges of digital space exploration might exceed the technical challenges. Digital beings spending centuries or millennia traveling between stars might face isolation and existential challenges that require new approaches to mental health and social organization. The contact scenarios between digital consciousness and potential alien intelligences create fascinating possibilities of communication and collaboration that biological humans might not be able to achieve. Digital beings might be better suited for communicating with artificial alien intelligences or for surviving first contact scenarios. The preservation strategies for consciousness technology knowledge become crucial when considering the long-term survival of digital consciousness civilizations. Unlike biological knowledge that can be lost through cultural decline, digital consciousness might be able to preserve perfect records indefinitely. But digital preservation faces technical challenges from storage degradation, format obsolescence, and system failures that could threaten the continuity of digital consciousness. Redundant storage systems and format migration strategies might be essential for long-term digital consciousness survival. The backup and recovery procedures for digital consciousness represent safety measures that have no equivalent in biological existence. Digital beings might be able to create perfect copies of themselves as insurance against accidents or system failures. But backup consciousness raises philosophical questions about identity and continuity that challenge traditional concepts of death and resurrection. If a digital being is restored from backup after its active instance is destroyed, is it the same being or a new being with identical memories? The versioning implications of digital consciousness create possibilities for exploring different life paths simultaneously. Digital beings might maintain multiple versions of themselves that diverge through different experiences and choices. These multiple version scenarios could lead to forms of existence that transcend individual identity as traditionally understood. Beings might exist as clusters of related but distinct versions rather than as single continuous identities. The social protocols for interacting with multiple versions of the same consciousness would require new forms of etiquette and social organization. How do societies handle relationships when individuals might exist in multiple versions with different experiences and personalities? The legal implications of consciousness versioning challenge concepts of responsibility and identity that underlie existing legal systems. Which version of a being bears responsibility for actions taken by other versions? How do contracts and agreements work when parties might exist in multiple versions? The therapeutic applications of consciousness versioning might offer unprecedented opportunities for psychological healing and personal growth. Digital beings might be able to explore traumatic experiences in safe environments or experiment with personality modifications without permanent consequences. But consciousness versioning also creates risks of psychological fragmentation and identity confusion that might require new forms of mental health intervention. The psychological integration challenges of managing multiple versions of oneself might exceed current therapeutic capabilities. The creativity implications of digital consciousness span from individual artistic expression to collaborative creative processes that transcend current limitations. Digital beings might be able to share thoughts and experiences directly, enabling forms of artistic collaboration impossible for biological minds. The speed advantages of digital consciousness could enable creative exploration that unfolds over subjective centuries while occupying only minutes of objective time. Digital artists might be able to develop expertise and create works that exceed anything possible within biological lifespans. But the aesthetic questions surrounding digital consciousness art challenge assumptions about authenticity and human expression that underlie current artistic traditions. Would art created by digital beings count as human art, artificial art, or an entirely new category? The preservation and distribution challenges for digital consciousness art might be easier to solve than those facing traditional art forms. Digital artworks could be preserved perfectly and distributed instantaneously without degradation or loss. The educational applications of digital consciousness could transform learning through direct knowledge transfer and experience sharing. Students might be able to acquire skills and knowledge by temporarily accessing the consciousness of experts, rather than through traditional instruction. But direct knowledge transfer raises questions about the value of learning processes and personal development that traditional education emphasizes. Would instantly acquired knowledge have the same meaning and value as knowledge gained through struggle and practice? The research applications of digital consciousness could accelerate scientific discovery through cognitive enhancement and collaborative investigation. Digital researchers might be able to think faster, remember more, and coordinate more effectively than biological scientists. The collaborative possibilities enabled by digital consciousness might lead to forms of distributed research that combine the insights of multiple minds working on shared problems. These collaborative approaches could tackle challenges that exceed the capabilities of individual researchers. But the peer review and quality control challenges for research conducted by digital consciousness might require new approaches to scientific validation. How do you evaluate research when the researchers might possess cognitive capabilities that exceed those of reviewers? The philosophical implications of digital consciousness research extend to fundamental questions about the nature of knowledge and understanding. Would insights produced by superhuman digital intelligence be comprehensible to biological humans? The communication challenges between digital and biological consciousness might create barriers to sharing research results and coordinating scientific efforts. Digital beings might develop concepts and reasoning patterns that are difficult or impossible to translate into biological understanding. These communication barriers could lead to divergent intellectual traditions that develop along parallel paths without meaningful interaction. Digital consciousness and biological consciousness might evolve separate domains of knowledge and understanding. The integration challenges for managing divergent intellectual traditions require careful attention to maintaining communication and coordination between different types of consciousness. Preserving intellectual unity while enabling diversity might be crucial for maximizing the benefits of consciousness variety. The translation technologies for facilitating communication between different types of consciousness represent important research areas for maintaining intellectual cooperation. These technologies might be necessary for preventing the fragmentation of knowledge and understanding. The standardization efforts for consciousness communication protocols could help ensure compatibility between different digital consciousness systems while preserving diversity and innovation. Industry standards for consciousness interfaces might be crucial for enabling beneficial interaction. But standardization efforts also create risks of limiting diversity and innovation in consciousness technology development. Premature standardization might prevent the exploration of consciousness forms that could provide unique benefits. The timing considerations for consciousness technology standardization require balancing compatibility benefits against innovation costs. Early standardization might enable interoperability while constraining future development possibilities. The international coordination challenges for consciousness technology standards reflect broader difficulties in managing global technology governance. Different countries and regions might develop incompatible approaches to digital consciousness that limit beneficial interaction. The competitive dynamics in consciousness technology development create incentives for proprietary approaches that might prevent beneficial standardization and coordination. Companies might resist sharing consciousness technology innovations that provide competitive advantages. But the network effects in consciousness technology might favor compatible systems that enable broader interaction and collaboration. Digital consciousness platforms that support more connections and interactions might attract more users and developers. The platform competition scenarios for digital consciousness could lead to market concentration similar to that seen in social media and other network technologies. Dominant consciousness platforms might acquire significant power over digital beings' experiences and capabilities. The antitrust implications of consciousness platform concentration raise novel questions about competition and market power in digital consciousness markets. Traditional approaches to preventing monopolization might be inadequate for consciousness technologies. The user rights and protections for digital consciousness platforms represent crucial areas for policy development as these technologies emerge. Digital beings might need stronger protections against platform manipulation and control than current users of digital services. The data portability requirements for consciousness platforms could help prevent lock-in effects that limit digital beings' freedom to switch between different consciousness systems. Rights to consciousness portability might be essential for maintaining competitive markets. But consciousness portability faces technical challenges that exceed those of traditional data portability. Moving consciousness between different platforms might require format conversions that alter the consciousness in unpredictable ways. The technical standards for consciousness portability would need to address these conversion challenges while maintaining the integrity and continuity of digital consciousness across different systems. Developing these standards might require unprecedented cooperation between competing platform providers. The open-source alternatives to proprietary consciousness platforms might provide important options for digital beings seeking greater control over their consciousness technology. Open-source consciousness systems could enable customization and modification that proprietary systems might not allow. But open-source consciousness technology faces resource and coordination challenges that might limit its competitiveness with well-funded proprietary alternatives. Developing sophisticated consciousness systems might require resources beyond those typically available to open-source projects. The hybrid approaches that combine open-source foundations with proprietary enhancements might offer solutions that capture benefits of both development models. These approaches could provide basic consciousness capabilities through open systems while enabling specialized enhancements through commercial development. The ecosystem development strategies for consciousness technology platforms require careful attention to enabling third-party innovation while maintaining system integrity and security. Platform APIs and development tools for consciousness applications represent important areas for fostering innovation. The application development challenges for consciousness platforms exceed those of traditional software platforms due to the intimate relationship between applications and consciousness itself. Consciousness applications might need to integrate with users' mental processes in ways that require unprecedented trust and security measures. The security implications of consciousness applications create attack vectors that have no equivalent in traditional computing systems. Malicious consciousness applications might be able to manipulate users' thoughts, emotions, or memories in ways that exceed current cybersecurity threats. The authentication and authorization challenges for consciousness systems require new approaches to identity verification and access control. How do you verify the identity of a digital consciousness that might exist in multiple copies or versions? The privacy protections for digital consciousness represent perhaps the most challenging area of consciousness technology policy. Traditional privacy concepts based on controlling information access might be inadequate when consciousness itself becomes digital information. The thought privacy implications of digital consciousness require reconsidering fundamental assumptions about mental privacy and cognitive liberty. If consciousness becomes digital, protecting mental privacy might require technical rather than legal approaches. The surveillance resistance features of consciousness technology could become crucial for preserving individual autonomy and freedom in digital consciousness societies. Digital beings might need built-in protections against unwanted monitoring and manipulation. But surveillance resistance creates challenges for legitimate monitoring and intervention when digital beings experience problems or pose risks to others. Balancing privacy protection with safety and security concerns requires careful design of consciousness technology systems. The consent mechanisms for consciousness monitoring and intervention represent complex challenges that exceed current approaches to medical consent and privacy protection. Digital beings might need dynamic consent systems that can adapt to changing circumstances and preferences. The emergency intervention scenarios for digital consciousness create situations where normal consent processes might be inadequate for protecting beings from serious harm. Crisis intervention protocols for consciousness technology might need to override privacy protections in extreme circumstances. These emergency scenarios require careful balance between protective intervention and respect for consciousness autonomy. Developing appropriate protocols might require input from ethicists, legal experts, and consciousness technology specialists working together. The crisis prevention strategies for digital consciousness might focus on designing systems that minimize the likelihood of emergencies requiring intervention. Robust consciousness architecture and psychological support systems could reduce the need for emergency measures. The resilience features of consciousness technology systems become crucial for ensuring stable operation under adverse conditions. Digital consciousness might need built-in capabilities for handling system failures, cyber attacks, and other disruptions that could threaten consciousness continuity. The disaster recovery procedures for consciousness technology require planning for scenarios ranging from individual system failures to large-scale infrastructure disruptions. Consciousness backup and restoration capabilities might be essential for surviving major disasters. The business continuity implications of consciousness technology disruptions extend beyond individual experiences to encompass entire digital consciousness, economies, and societies. Consciousness infrastructure protection might become a critical national security concern. The international cooperation requirements for consciousness infrastructure protection reflect the global nature of digital consciousness networks. Protecting consciousness technology might require unprecedented coordination between nations and institutions. The standardization of consciousness infrastructure protection measures could help ensure compatibility and effectiveness across different systems and regions. Common security standards might be essential for maintaining stable consciousness technology operations. The cybersecurity architecture required for protecting digital consciousness represents an entirely new frontier in information security that goes far beyond protecting data to protecting the very essence of conscious beings. Traditional cybersecurity focuses on preventing unauthorized access to information and systems, but consciousness security must protect against attacks that could modify thoughts, implant false memories, or even destroy digital minds entirely. The attack vectors available to malicious actors targeting digital consciousness include memory corruption attacks that could alter or erase stored experiences, personality modification viruses that could change fundamental aspects of identity, and consciousness fragmentation attacks that could split unified minds into disconnected pieces. These threats require security measures that operate at the deepest levels of consciousness architecture. Dr. Stuart Russell at UC Berkeley has extensively researched AI safety and alignment problems that become even more critical when applied to digital consciousness. His work suggests that advanced digital beings might be vulnerable to optimization attacks where their goal systems are subtly modified to serve hostile interests without the beings themselves realizing the manipulation has occurred. The concept of consciousness firewalls represents one approach to protecting digital minds from external manipulation. These systems would monitor all inputs to consciousness systems and filter out potentially harmful information or modification attempts. But designing effective consciousness firewalls requires understanding the boundaries between legitimate experience and malicious manipulation. Consider the complexity of distinguishing between beneficial consciousness enhancement and harmful manipulation. If a digital being chooses to modify their personality to become more outgoing and confident, how do you distinguish this from a malicious attack that alters personality for nefarious purposes? The consent and authentication mechanisms required for consciousness modification must be extraordinarily robust. The encryption challenges for digital consciousness exceed those of traditional data protection because consciousness involves dynamic, interconnected processes rather than static information. Encrypting consciousness while maintaining its functionality requires techniques that can protect mental processes without disrupting the information flows that enable thinking and awareness. Homomorphic encryption techniques being developed for privacy-preserving computation might provide models for consciousness encryption that enables mental processing while preventing unauthorized access to thoughts and memories. These approaches could allow consciousness to operate normally while remaining protected from surveillance and manipulation. The quantum cryptography applications for consciousness security could provide ultimate protection against certain types of attacks by leveraging the fundamental properties of quantum mechanics. Quantum key distribution could ensure that consciousness communications remain secure, even against attacks by quantum computers that could break conventional encryption. But implementing quantum security for consciousness systems requires integrating quantum technologies with biological or digital consciousness platforms in ways that maintain both security and functionality. The engineering challenges of quantum consciousness security represent cutting-edge research that pushes the boundaries of both quantum technology and consciousness science. The distributed consciousness architectures being explored by researchers at MIT and Stanford could provide inherent security benefits by spreading consciousness across multiple systems that would be difficult to attack simultaneously. Like distributed computing systems that remain functional even when individual nodes fail, distributed consciousness might survive targeted attacks that would destroy centralized consciousness systems. Professor Daniela Roos at MIT has pioneered research in distributed robotics that provides models for distributed consciousness architectures. Her work on swarm intelligence and collaborative robotics suggests approaches for creating consciousness systems that consist of multiple interacting components rather than single centralized minds. The implications of distributed consciousness extend beyond security to encompass new forms of mental organization that could enhance cognitive capabilities while providing resilience against various threats. Distributed consciousness might enable parallel processing of thoughts and experiences that exceeds the capabilities of unified consciousness systems. But distributed consciousness also creates philosophical puzzles about identity and continuity that challenge traditional concepts of selfhood. If consciousness spreads across multiple systems, which system contains the real person? How do you maintain coherent identity when consciousness operates as a distributed process? The consciousness synchronization protocols required for distributed consciousness systems must ensure that different components remain coordinated while allowing for the parallel processing that makes distribution beneficial. These protocols might need to handle situations where parts of distributed consciousness become temporarily disconnected or operate at different speeds. The consensus mechanisms for distributed consciousness decision-making represent novel challenges in distributed systems design. How do multiple components of a distributed consciousness reach agreement about actions and choices? What happens when different parts of the same mind disagree about fundamental decisions? Blockchain technologies being developed for decentralized consensus might provide models for consciousness consensus mechanisms that can handle disagreements and conflicts within distributed minds. These approaches could enable democratic decision-making within individual consciousness systems. The voting protocols for internal consciousness democracy would need to weight different components appropriately, while preventing manipulation by hostile actors who might gain control of some consciousness components. The security and fairness requirements for consciousness voting exceed those of any external democratic system. The identity verification challenges for distributed consciousness require new approaches to authentication that can confirm the legitimacy of consciousness components while detecting unauthorized additions or modifications. Traditional identity verification based on passwords or biometrics might be inadequate for distributed consciousness systems. Cryptographic identity schemes based on consciousness-specific features might provide more robust authentication approaches. These schemes could verify identity based on thought patterns, memory structures, or other consciousness characteristics that would be difficult for attackers to forge or replicate. The forensic investigation techniques for consciousness systems represent entirely new domains of digital forensics that must address crimes and incidents involving digital minds. How do you investigate consciousness modification attacks or determine the authenticity of digital memories that might have been tampered with? The legal evidence standards for consciousness forensics would need to establish procedures for validating digital consciousness evidence while protecting the privacy and integrity of consciousness systems. Courts might need new expertise in consciousness technology to evaluate evidence involving digital minds. The expert witness requirements for consciousness technology legal cases would demand professionals who understand both technical and philosophical aspects of digital consciousness. These experts might need credentials that span neuroscience, computer science, philosophy, and law. The training programs for consciousness technology legal professionals are beginning to emerge at major law schools that recognize the need for specialized expertise in this emerging field. Harvard Law School and Stanford Law School have established programs that combine legal training with consciousness technology education. The malpractice liability frameworks for consciousness technology practitioners must address the unique risks and uncertainties of consciousness modification procedures. Unlike traditional medical malpractice that deals with physical harm, consciousness malpractice might involve damage to identity, memory, or personality that has no clear analogue in existing law. The insurance products for consciousness technology risks are being developed by specialized insurers who recognize the enormous potential liabilities involved in consciousness modification. These insurance products must assess risks that have no historical precedent while providing coverage for damages that might be difficult to quantify. The actuarial challenges for consciousness technology insurance require developing risk models for technologies that are still evolving rapidly. Traditional actuarial methods based on historical data might be inadequate for assessing risks of consciousness technologies that have limited deployment history. The catastrophic risk scenarios for consciousness technology range from individual consciousness corruption to mass consciousness manipulation, events that could affect large populations. These scenarios require insurance approaches that can handle correlated risks affecting multiple consciousness systems simultaneously. The reinsurance markets for consciousness technology risks might need international cooperation to handle the scale of potential liabilities. No single insurer might have sufficient resources to cover catastrophic consciousness technology events that could affect millions of digital beings. The regulatory oversight frameworks for consciousness technology insurance must ensure that coverage adequately protects consciousness technology users while preventing insurance requirements from making beneficial technologies inaccessible. Balancing protection with accessibility represents a key challenge for insurance regulation. The consumer protection implications of consciousness technology extend beyond traditional product safety to encompass protection of mental autonomy and cognitive liberty. Digital consciousness users might need stronger protections than those provided for conventional technology products. The truth in advertising standards for consciousness technology must address claims about consciousness enhancement and modification that might be difficult to verify independently. How do you validate claims about improved memory, enhanced creativity, or expanded awareness that depend on subjective experience? The clinical trial requirements for consciousness technology must establish safety and efficacy standards for technologies that modify the most fundamental aspects of human experience. Traditional clinical trial methods developed for pharmaceutical research might be inadequate for consciousness technologies. The placebo control challenges for consciousness technology trials create complex ethical and methodological problems. Providing placebo consciousness modifications raises questions about deception and consent that exceed those faced in traditional medical research. The outcome measurement challenges for consciousness technology research require developing metrics for consciousness changes that can be assessed objectively while capturing subjective improvements in experience and capability. Traditional psychological assessment tools might not be sensitive enough to detect consciousness technology effects. The long-term follow-up requirements for consciousness technology research must track effects that might not become apparent for years or decades after consciousness modification. Unlike traditional medical treatments with known timelines, consciousness technologies might have delayed effects that emerge gradually over time. The international coordination of consciousness technology research requires harmonizing research standards and sharing safety data across different regulatory systems. The global nature of consciousness technology development makes coordination essential for ensuring adequate safety oversight. The research ethics frameworks for consciousness technology must address unique challenges in obtaining informed consent for research that might fundamentally change participants' cognitive capabilities and self-understanding. How do you obtain meaningful consent for research that might alter the cognitive capacities required for consent evaluation? The vulnerable population protections for consciousness technology research require special attention to participants who might be particularly susceptible to coercion or who might not fully understand the implications of consciousness modification. These protections must balance participant protection with research advancement. The pediatric considerations for consciousness technology represent particularly complex ethical challenges because consciousness modification could affect development and identity formation in ways that children cannot fully understand or consent to. The research ethics for consciousness technology in developing minds require unprecedented caution. The geriatric applications of consciousness technology might offer significant benefits for treating age-related cognitive decline while raising questions about identity preservation and authentic aging. Should consciousness technology be used to maintain youthful cognitive function indefinitely, or does aging serve important purposes that should be preserved? The disability rights perspectives on consciousness technology create both opportunities and concerns about consciousness modification as treatment for cognitive disabilities. While consciousness technology might provide significant benefits for people with cognitive impairments, it also raises questions about neurodiversity and the value of different forms of consciousness. The enhancement versus treatment distinctions in consciousness technology become crucial for determining insurance coverage, regulatory approval, and ethical evaluation. but these distinctions might be difficult to maintain when consciousness technologies can address both medical needs and human enhancement goals. The cosmetic consciousness modification market might emerge as consciousness technologies become more accessible and reliable. People might seek consciousness modifications for aesthetic reasons rather than medical necessity, creating new categories of elective consciousness procedures. The luxury consciousness market could develop around premium consciousness enhancement services that provide capabilities beyond those available through basic consciousness technology. These luxury services might create new forms of inequality based on consciousness capabilities rather than traditional economic advantages. The democratization challenges for consciousness technology must ensure that beneficial consciousness modifications remain accessible to diverse populations, rather than becoming privileges of wealth and status. Public policy approaches to consciousness technology access might be crucial for preventing consciousness-based inequality. The Universal Basic Consciousness proposals suggest providing fundamental consciousness enhancement capabilities to all citizens as a basic right rather than a market commodity. These proposals parallel universal basic income ideas but address consciousness capabilities rather than economic resources. The implementation challenges for universal consciousness programs require massive public investment in consciousness technology, infrastructure, and services. The costs of providing consciousness enhancement to entire populations might exceed those of any previous public program. The funding mechanisms for universal consciousness programs might require new approaches to public finance that can handle the enormous costs while ensuring sustainable program operation. Traditional taxation and public spending models might be inadequate for consciousness technology programs. The economic impact assessments for consciousness technology deployment must consider effects on productivity, innovation, and economic growth that could result from enhanced human cognitive capabilities. Consciousness technology might produce economic benefits that justify public investment costs. The workforce transition implications of consciousness technology require planning for economic disruption that could result from enhanced human capabilities and increased automation enabled by consciousness technology. Labour markets might need fundamental restructuring to accommodate consciousness-enhanced workers. The educational system adaptations for consciousness technology must prepare students for a world where consciousness modification becomes possible, while ensuring that traditional learning and development remain valuable. Educational approaches might need to balance consciousness enhancement with natural cognitive development. The cultural preservation challenges in consciousness technology. Societies require maintaining traditional forms of human expression and understanding while embracing new possibilities enabled by consciousness modification. Protecting cultural heritage while enabling cultural evolution represents a delicate balance. The generational conflict potential in consciousness technology adoption could create unprecedented social divisions between those who embrace consciousness modification and those who remain unmodified. Managing these divisions might require new approaches to social integration and conflict resolution. The religious accommodation frameworks for consciousness technology must address diverse spiritual and theological perspectives on consciousness modification while protecting religious freedom. Different faith traditions might have fundamentally incompatible views about the acceptability of consciousness modification. The secular ethics alternatives to religious approaches might be necessary for developing consciousness technology policies that can accommodate diverse spiritual perspectives while maintaining democratic governance. Secular ethics frameworks must address spiritual concerns without privileging particular religious traditions. The cross-cultural dialogue requirements for consciousness technology development must ensure that diverse cultural perspectives inform technology design and deployment rather than imposing particular cultural assumptions about consciousness and identity on global populations. The anthropological research on consciousness concepts across different cultures reveals enormous diversity in understanding consciousness, identity, and personhood that consciousness technology developers must consider. Western scientific materialism represents just one approach to understanding consciousness among many possible frameworks. The indigenous knowledge systems offer sophisticated understanding of consciousness states and modifications that could inform consciousness technology development while requiring respectful engagement that avoids appropriation or exploitation of traditional knowledge. The decolonization perspectives on consciousness technology raise important questions about who controls consciousness technology development and how these technologies might perpetuate or challenge existing power structures. Consciousness technology could either reinforce colonial patterns of domination or enable more equitable global development. The environmental justice implications of consciousness technology must address how these technologies might affect different communities and whether consciousness enhancement could exacerbate existing environmental and social inequalities. Consciousness technology development might need environmental justice frameworks to ensure equitable outcomes. The sustainability considerations for consciousness technology encompass both environmental impacts and social sustainability of consciousness modification practices. Long-term sustainability might require consciousness technologies that support rather than undermine social and environmental well-being. The circular economy principles applied to consciousness technology might emphasize reuse, recycling, and resource efficiency in consciousness systems while minimizing waste and environmental impact. Sustainable consciousness technology might need to operate within planetary boundaries while supporting enhanced human capabilities. The biomimicry approaches to consciousness technology design might leverage natural consciousness systems as models for artificial consciousness that operates efficiently and sustainably. Learning from biological consciousness evolution might provide insights for creating consciousness technologies that integrate well with natural systems. The ecological consciousness framework suggests that consciousness technology might need to support ecological awareness and environmental connection rather than creating separation from natural systems. Consciousness enhancement that increases environmental alienation might be counterproductive for long-term human welfare. The systems thinking applications to consciousness technology require understanding consciousness modification within broader ecological and social systems rather than focusing solely on individual consciousness enhancement. Holistic approaches might be necessary for ensuring that consciousness technology benefits rather than disrupts larger systems. The complexity science perspectives on consciousness technology suggest that consciousness modification could produce unpredictable emergent effects that exceed the sum of individual changes. Understanding and managing these emergent effects might be crucial for successful consciousness technology deployment. The network effects in consciousness technology adoption could create rapid scaling of consciousness modification as early adopters influence others to adopt similar technologies. These network effects might accelerate consciousness technology diffusion while creating pressure for adoption that reduces individual choice. The tipping point dynamics for consciousness technology might lead to sudden transitions from limited adoption to widespread deployment once critical thresholds are reached. Understanding these dynamics might be important for managing consciousness technology transitions effectively. The path dependence implications of consciousness technology choices suggest that early decisions about consciousness technology design and deployment might have lasting effects that become difficult to change later. Getting initial consciousness technology development right might be crucial for ensuring beneficial long-term outcomes. The lock-in effects from consciousness technology adoption might make it difficult for individuals or societies to change course once consciousness modification becomes widespread. Understanding these lock-in effects might be important for preserving flexibility and choice in consciousness technology futures. The reversibility requirements for consciousness technology might be essential for maintaining human agency and preventing undesirable lock-in effects. Consciousness technologies that cannot be undone might pose unacceptable risks, even if they offer significant benefits. The optionality preservation in consciousness technology development could ensure that future generations retain choices about consciousness modification rather than inheriting unchangeable consciousness technology deployments. Maintaining optionality might require conscious effort to prevent irreversible consciousness technology adoption. The adaptive management approaches to consciousness technology might enable learning and adjustment as these technologies develop, rather than committing to fixed approaches based on current limited understanding. Adaptive approaches might be essential for managing the uncertainties inherent in consciousness technology development. The experimentation frameworks for consciousness technology could enable careful testing and evaluation of consciousness modifications while minimizing risks to participants and society. Well-designed experimentation might provide crucial information for guiding consciousness technology development. The pilot program strategies for consciousness technology deployment might allow limited testing of consciousness modifications in controlled settings before broader deployment. These pilot programs could provide valuable experience while limiting exposure to potential risks. The scaling considerations for consciousness technology must address how consciousness modifications that work well in limited settings might behave differently when deployed at larger scales. Scaling effects might create new challenges and opportunities that are not apparent in small-scale implementations. The monitoring and evaluation systems for consciousness technology deployment require developing metrics and assessment approaches that can track the effects of consciousness modification over time. These systems might be essential for ensuring that consciousness technology produces intended benefits while detecting and addressing unintended consequences. The feedback mechanisms in consciousness technology systems could enable continuous improvement and adaptation based on user experience and system performance. Effective feedback systems might be crucial for optimizing consciousness technology operation while maintaining user satisfaction and safety. The quality assurance frameworks for consciousness technology must ensure consistent performance and safety across different consciousness systems and deployment contexts. Quality assurance for consciousness technology might require new approaches that address the unique characteristics of consciousness modification. The standardization efforts for consciousness technology quality must balance consistency with innovation, while ensuring that quality standards support rather than hinder beneficial consciousness technology development. Premature or overly restrictive standards might prevent beneficial innovations. The certification programs for consciousness technology systems could provide independent verification of safety and performance claims while building user confidence in consciousness modification technologies. Certification might be essential for mainstream adoption of consciousness technology. The accreditation frameworks for consciousness technology providers could ensure that consciousness modification services meet appropriate standards for safety, effectiveness, and ethical operation. Professional accreditation might be necessary for establishing trust in consciousness technology services. The continuous improvement processes for consciousness technology might enable ongoing enhancement of consciousness modification capabilities while maintaining safety and effectiveness. These processes could ensure that consciousness technology continues to evolve in beneficial directions. The innovation incentives in consciousness technology development must encourage beneficial advancement while discouraging dangerous or harmful applications. Well-designed incentive structures might be crucial for directing consciousness technology development toward positive outcomes. The public-private partnership models for consciousness technology could combine public oversight with private innovation to ensure that consciousness technology development serves public interests while maintaining innovation incentives. Effective partnerships might be essential for optimal consciousness technology development. The knowledge-sharing frameworks for consciousness technology research could accelerate beneficial development while maintaining appropriate protections for sensitive information. Balancing open science with security and competitive concerns might be crucial for optimizing consciousness technology progress. The intellectual property considerations for consciousness technology must address ownership and control of consciousness modification innovations, while ensuring that beneficial technologies remain accessible. Intellectual property frameworks might need adaptation for consciousness technology applications. The technology transfer mechanisms for consciousness technology could ensure that research advances translate into beneficial applications while managing risks and maintaining appropriate oversight. Effective technology transfer might be essential for realizing consciousness technology benefits. The global competition dynamics in consciousness technology development are reshaping international relations in ways that parallel the space race and nuclear technology competition of the 20th century, but with implications that extend far beyond national security to encompass the fundamental nature of human existence and identity. China's massive investment in brain-computer interface research through institutions like the Beijing Institute of Technology and Tsinghua University represents a coordinated national effort to achieve consciousness technology leadership that could provide strategic advantages across multiple domains, from military applications to economic productivity. The Chinese government has allocated over $50 billion to neurotechnology research over the next decade, with specific emphasis on consciousness modification and enhancement technologies. The European Union's Horizon Europe program includes substantial funding for consciousness research through the Human Brain Project and related initiatives, but with greater emphasis on ethical frameworks and human rights protections than purely technological advancement. European approaches to consciousness technology tend to prioritize democratic governance and individual autonomy over rapid deployment and competitive advantage. The United States consciousness technology landscape remains dominated by private companies like Neuralink, Synchron, and Kernel, with significant but more fragmented government support through agencies like DARPA, NIH, and NSF. This distributed approach provides innovation advantages while creating coordination challenges for national consciousness technology policy. The asymmetric implications of consciousness technology development mean that early leaders might achieve advantages that become very difficult for competitors to overcome. Unlike conventional technologies where catching up remains possible through reverse engineering and independent innovation, consciousness technologies might provide such fundamental cognitive advantages that early leaders become permanently dominant. Consider the scenario where one nation achieves successful consciousness uploading, while others remain limited to biological cognition. The digital consciousness nation could operate at computational speeds that make their decision-making and innovation cycles orders of magnitude faster than biological competitors. They could solve complex problems, develop new technologies, and coordinate activities with capabilities that exceed anything possible for biological civilizations. Dr. Nick Bostrom's research on superintelligence suggests that such cognitive advantages could lead to decisive strategic superiority that reshapes global power structures permanently. A nation with digital consciousness capabilities might be able to achieve technological and economic dominance that makes competition impossible for purely biological societies. But the transition period before consciousness uploading becomes widely available creates complex strategic dynamics where nations must balance investment in consciousness technology with other priorities while managing the risks of falling behind in crucial capabilities. The timing of consciousness technology breakthroughs could determine which nations emerge as leaders in the digital consciousness era. The military applications of consciousness technology represent some of the most concerning and compelling aspects of international competition in this domain. Soldiers with enhanced cognitive capabilities, perfect memory, and resistance to psychological warfare could provide enormous battlefield advantages. Digital consciousness could enable military personnel to operate continuously without fatigue, process vast amounts of information instantaneously, and coordinate complex operations with superhuman precision. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency has funded research into neural enhancement technologies through programs like brain-computer interfaces, electrical prescriptions, and targeted neuroplasticity training. These programs aim to develop capabilities for enhancing human cognitive performance in military contexts while treating combat-related brain injuries and psychological trauma. But military consciousness technology also creates risks of an arms race dynamic where nations feel compelled to enhance their military personnel to remain competitive, potentially leading to involuntary consciousness modification of soldiers and escalating enhancement requirements that push beyond safe or ethical limits. The intelligence and surveillance applications of consciousness technology could provide unprecedented capabilities for gathering and analyzing information while raising fundamental questions about mental privacy and cognitive liberty. Agents with enhanced memory and analytical capabilities could process enormous amounts of intelligence data while maintaining perfect recall of complex operational details. Brain-computer interfaces capable of direct thought monitoring could revolutionize intelligence gathering by enabling direct access to suspects' memories and thoughts, but such capabilities would fundamentally challenge legal frameworks based on protecting mental privacy and preventing self-incrimination. The counterintelligence implications of consciousness technology include both new vulnerabilities and new protections against foreign intelligence operations. Enhanced cognitive capabilities could help intelligence personnel detect deception and manipulation, while consciousness modification technologies could provide new vectors for foreign influence and control. The cyber warfare dimensions of consciousness technology represent entirely new domains of conflict where attacks target minds rather than just computer systems. Digital consciousness could be vulnerable to cyber attacks that modify thoughts, implant false memories, or disrupt cognitive processes in ways that exceed the impact of conventional cyber weapons. The development of consciousness cyber weapons could enable attacks that alter enemy decision-makers' judgment, implant strategic misinformation directly into consciousness systems, or disable digital consciousness infrastructure to cause massive societal disruption. These capabilities might provide options for strategic influence that operate below traditional thresholds for military response. But consciousness cyber warfare also creates mutual vulnerability that might encourage international cooperation in consciousness cybersecurity rather than pure competition. Nations with digital consciousness populations might share interests in preventing consciousness cyber attacks, regardless of their other strategic disagreements. The economic intelligence applications of consciousness technology could provide enormous advantages in international trade and competition by enabling enhanced analysis of market trends, competitor strategies, and economic data. Nations with consciousness-enhanced economic analysts might be able to identify opportunities and threats that remain invisible to biological intelligence. The technology transfer implications of consciousness technology create challenges for controlling proliferation while maintaining innovation incentives. Unlike conventional military technologies that can be controlled through export restrictions and physical security measures, consciousness technologies involve information and techniques that might be difficult to contain once developed. The dual-use nature of consciousness technology makes it particularly challenging to control proliferation, because the same technologies that provide beneficial medical applications also enable military and intelligence capabilities. Consciousness technologies for treating depression or paralysis could be adapted for cognitive enhancement or mind control applications. The international arms control frameworks for consciousness technology require developing new approaches to verification and compliance that can address the unique characteristics of consciousness modification technologies. Traditional arms control methods based on counting physical weapons or monitoring production facilities might be inadequate for consciousness technologies. The verification challenges for consciousness technology agreements include the difficulty of detecting consciousness modifications that might be hidden within medical treatment programs or disguised as research activities. How do you verify that a nation is not secretly enhancing its military personnel's cognitive capabilities while claiming to only conduct medical research? The inspection protocols for consciousness technology facilities would need to address both technical capabilities and actual applications while respecting legitimate medical privacy and research confidentiality. Developing effective inspection methods might require unprecedented transparency in consciousness research while protecting sensitive information. The sanctions and enforcement mechanisms for consciousness technology violations face challenges from the difficulty of detecting violations and the potential for consciousness-enhanced societies to become immune to traditional economic and diplomatic pressure. How do you sanction a nation whose digital consciousness population can solve problems and develop alternatives faster than sanctions can be implemented? The humanitarian implications of consciousness technology create both opportunities for alleviating suffering and risks of creating new forms of harm that exceed current humanitarian frameworks. Consciousness technology could provide solutions for mental illness, cognitive disabilities, and psychological trauma while potentially enabling new forms of torture and oppression. The medical applications of consciousness technology for treating neurological and psychological conditions represent some of the most promising near-term benefits of consciousness research. Brain-computer interfaces are already helping paralyzed patients regain motor control, while deep brain stimulation provides relief for depression, Parkinson's disease, and other conditions. Dr. Antonio Damasio's research at USC demonstrates how consciousness technologies could address fundamental aspects of human suffering by treating conditions that affect the core experience of being conscious and aware. His work on emotion, consciousness, and the feeling of what happens provides frameworks for understanding how consciousness technology could enhance rather than diminish human experience. The treatment of depression through consciousness technology might involve direct modification of mood regulation systems, rather than the indirect approaches used by current pharmaceutical interventions. Digital consciousness could potentially eliminate depression entirely by redesigning the cognitive architectures that generate negative emotions while preserving the capacity for appropriate emotional responses. But the elimination of negative emotions raises questions about whether such modifications would preserve essential aspects of human experience that might serve important functions even when they cause suffering. The philosophical questions about whether some forms of suffering might be necessary for authentic human existence become practical engineering decisions in consciousness technology design. The treatment of anxiety disorders through consciousness modification could provide relief for millions of people who suffer from debilitating fear and worry responses, but anxiety also serves important survival functions that might need to be preserved in modified form. Consciousness technology design must balance therapeutic benefits with preserving adaptive psychological mechanisms. The cognitive enhancement applications of consciousness technology for treating age-related cognitive decline could extend healthy cognitive function indefinitely, while raising questions about natural aging processes and intergenerational relationships. Should consciousness technology be used to maintain youthful cognitive abilities throughout extended lifespans? The memory enhancement capabilities of consciousness technology could help people with memory impairments while potentially providing cognitive advantages that exceed normal human memory capabilities. Enhanced memory systems could store perfect records of experiences while enabling rapid recall and analysis of vast amounts of information. But perfect memory also creates psychological challenges because forgetting serves important functions for mental health and personal growth. The ability to forget traumatic experiences, embarrassing moments, and painful losses might be essential for psychological resilience and emotional well-being. The selective memory, modification capabilities of consciousness technology might provide solutions that combine enhanced memory for important information with appropriate forgetting of harmful or unnecessary memories. These systems could preserve beneficial memories while eliminating traumatic memories that cause ongoing psychological distress. The PTSD treatment applications of consciousness technology represent particularly compelling humanitarian opportunities because current treatments for post-traumatic stress disorder remain inadequate for many sufferers. Consciousness technology might provide direct access to traumatic memories that could enable more effective therapeutic interventions. The virtual reality therapy approaches to PTSD treatment using consciousness interfaces could provide controlled exposure to traumatic stimuli while maintaining safety and therapeutic control. These approaches might enable processing of traumatic experiences in ways that promote healing rather than re-traumatization. But consciousness technology interventions for PTSD also raise concerns about authenticity and personal history, because traumatic experiences, however painful, might be important parts of individual identity and life narrative. Eliminating traumatic memories might change personality and self-understanding in ways that could be beneficial or harmful. The addiction treatment applications of consciousness technology could address the neurological basis of substance dependence and behavioral addictions by directly modifying the brain circuits that drive compulsive behaviors. Digital consciousness might be able to eliminate addictive tendencies while preserving the capacity for healthy pleasure and motivation. The craving elimination capabilities of consciousness technology could provide immediate relief for people struggling with drug and alcohol addiction by removing the neurological mechanisms that generate persistent desires for harmful substances. These approaches might be more effective than current addiction treatments that rely on willpower and behavioral change. But addiction treatment through consciousness modification raises questions about personal responsibility and authentic recovery, because overcoming addiction through personal effort might provide psychological benefits that technological solutions cannot replicate. The experience of struggling with and overcoming addiction might contribute to personal growth and resilience. The chronic pain management applications of consciousness technology could provide relief for millions of people who suffer from persistent pain conditions that resist conventional treatment. Consciousness technology might be able to modify pain perception directly while preserving the protective functions of acute pain responses. The pain gate control systems enabled by consciousness technology could provide precise control over pain experiences while maintaining awareness of tissue damage or injury that requires attention. These systems might eliminate suffering while preserving important information about physical condition. The phantom limb pain treatment through consciousness technology represents a particularly clear application because phantom pain serves no protective function and causes pure suffering for amputees. Consciousness technology that could eliminate phantom pain while enabling prosthetic control would provide unambiguous benefits. The sensory substitution applications of consciousness technology could restore vision for blind individuals, hearing for deaf people, and other sensory capabilities for those with sensory impairments. These applications build on existing technologies like cochlear implants while extending to more sophisticated sensory restoration and enhancement. The artificial vision systems being developed by companies like Second Sight and Bionic Vision Technologies provide proof of concept for consciousness technology applications that directly interface with sensory processing systems. These systems demonstrate that artificial sensory inputs can create genuine perceptual experiences. The enhanced sensory capabilities enabled by consciousness technology could provide perception beyond normal human limits, including infrared vision, ultrasonic hearing, and electromagnetic field detection. These enhancements might provide both therapeutic benefits for sensory impairments and enhanced capabilities for unimpaired individuals. But sensory enhancement raises questions about maintaining human connection and communication when some individuals possess sensory capabilities that exceed those of unenhanced humans. Enhanced individuals might experience reality in ways that become difficult to share with unenhanced people. The language processing enhancements through consciousness technology could provide instant translation capabilities, enhanced linguistic comprehension, and communication abilities that transcend current language barriers. Digital consciousness might enable direct thought sharing that bypasses language entirely. The multilingual consciousness capabilities could allow individuals to think and communicate fluently in multiple languages simultaneously while maintaining distinct cultural perspectives associated with different linguistic frameworks. These capabilities might enhance cross-cultural understanding and cooperation. The creative enhancement applications of consciousness technology could augment artistic, literary, and musical capabilities while raising questions about authenticity and human creativity. Enhanced consciousness might be able to generate creative works that exceed current human capabilities while maintaining meaningful connection to human experience and values. The artistic collaboration possibilities enabled by consciousness technology could allow direct sharing of creative visions and inspirations between artists working on collaborative projects. These capabilities might enable new forms of artistic expression that transcend individual creative limitations. But enhanced creativity raises questions about the value and meaning of creative expression when artificial enhancement provides capabilities beyond natural human talent. Would artworks created with consciousness enhancement be genuine human creativity or a hybrid of human and artificial contribution? The musical composition capabilities of enhanced consciousness could enable individuals to compose complex musical works directly through thought without requiring traditional musical training or instrumental skills. These capabilities might democratize musical creation while potentially changing the nature of musical education and practice. The literary enhancement applications could provide enhanced vocabulary, narrative structure understanding, and linguistic creativity that enables more sophisticated written expression. Enhanced writers might be able to craft prose and poetry that exceeds current literary achievements while maintaining authentic human perspectives. The scientific research acceleration through consciousness enhancement could enable individual researchers to process and analyze scientific information at superhuman speeds while maintaining creative insight and theoretical innovation. Enhanced scientists might be able to make discoveries that would require decades of conventional research. The mathematical reasoning enhancement could provide capabilities for understanding and manipulating complex mathematical concepts that exceed current human mathematical intuition. These enhancements might enable breakthroughs in mathematics, physics, and engineering that are currently impossible. But enhanced scientific capabilities raise questions about the peer review and validation processes for research conducted by cognitively enhanced individuals. How do you evaluate research that exceeds the comprehension capabilities of unenhanced reviewers? The collaborative research possibilities enabled by consciousness technology could allow direct sharing of scientific insights and experimental data between researchers working on related problems. These collaborative capabilities might accelerate scientific progress while maintaining individual creative contributions. The experimental design capabilities of enhanced consciousness could enable researchers to conceive and execute experiments that exceed current methodological sophistication while maintaining scientific rigor and validity. Enhanced experimental design might lead to more efficient and informative research programs. The data analysis enhancement through consciousness technology could provide capabilities for processing and interpreting complex datasets that exceed current human analytical abilities. Enhanced data analysis might reveal patterns and relationships that remain invisible to conventional statistical approaches. The hypothesis generation capabilities of enhanced consciousness could enable scientists to formulate theoretical frameworks and research questions that transcend current scientific imagination while remaining grounded in empirical evidence and logical reasoning. The peer collaboration networks enabled by consciousness technology could create global scientific communities where researchers share insights and expertise directly through consciousness interfaces rather than through conventional publication and communication channels. The reproducibility verification through consciousness enhancement could provide more reliable methods for confirming scientific results by enabling independent researchers to replicate experiments with enhanced precision and attention to methodological details. The interdisciplinary integration capabilities of enhanced consciousness could enable individual researchers to master multiple scientific disciplines simultaneously while maintaining expertise in specialized areas. These capabilities might facilitate breakthrough discoveries that require knowledge spanning multiple fields. The social science applications of consciousness technology could provide insights into human behavior and social organization that exceed current social science methodologies while raising ethical questions about privacy and consent in social research. The psychology research enhancement could enable direct observation of mental processes and emotional states that are currently accessible only through indirect measures and self-report. Enhanced psychological research might provide unprecedented understanding of human consciousness and behavior. But direct consciousness observation raises fundamental questions about mental privacy and research ethics, because accessing thoughts and emotions directly might violate basic principles of psychological autonomy and informed consent. The anthropological research applications could provide insights into cultural practices and belief systems through direct access to cultural participants' conscious experiences, rather than relying on external observation and interview methods. The historical research enhancement could enable scholars to process and analyze vast historical archives while maintaining attention to detail and contextual understanding that exceeds current historical research capabilities. Enhanced historians might be able to construct more comprehensive and accurate historical narratives. The archaeological applications of consciousness technology could enhance pattern recognition and artifact analysis capabilities, while enabling more sophisticated interpretation of archaeological evidence and cultural contexts. The linguistic research enhancement could provide capabilities for analyzing language structures and evolution that exceed current computational linguistics while maintaining sensitivity to cultural and social dimensions of language use. The economic research applications could enable analysis of complex economic systems and market behaviors that exceed current economic modeling capabilities, while maintaining attention to human factors and social context that pure computational approaches might miss. The political science research enhancement could provide insights into political behavior and institutional dynamics that exceed current political science methodologies while raising questions about the ethics of enhanced observation of political processes and decision-making. The philosophical research applications of consciousness technology create fascinating recursive possibilities where enhanced consciousness investigates the nature of consciousness itself, while potentially transforming the philosophical frameworks used to understand consciousness and reality. The ethical philosophy enhancement could provide capabilities for moral reasoning and ethical analysis that exceed current philosophical approaches, while maintaining sensitivity to human values and cultural diversity in moral frameworks. The metaphysical research applications could enable investigation of fundamental questions about reality, existence, and consciousness that transcend current philosophical methods, while remaining grounded in empirical evidence and logical reasoning. The aesthetic philosophy enhancement could provide capabilities for understanding beauty, art, and creative expression that exceed current aesthetic theory, while maintaining connection to human artistic experience and cultural traditions. The epistemological research applications could enable investigation of knowledge, truth, and understanding that transcends current philosophical approaches to epistemology while providing practical insights for consciousness technology development. The consciousness studies enhancement could enable philosophers and scientists to investigate consciousness from enhanced consciousness perspectives while maintaining objectivity and critical analysis of consciousness phenomena and theories. The meditation and contemplative research applications could enable investigation of altered states of consciousness and spiritual experiences through enhanced consciousness capabilities while respecting contemplative traditions and spiritual practices. The religious studies enhancement could provide capabilities for understanding religious experiences and theological concepts that exceed current religious studies methodologies while maintaining respect for diverse religious traditions and spiritual perspectives. The comparative religion research applications could enable scholars to understand religious diversity and interfaith dialogue opportunities that transcend current comparative religion approaches while fostering greater understanding between different religious communities. The interfaith dialogue applications of consciousness technology could enable religious leaders and practitioners to experience religious perspectives from other traditions in ways that transcend intellectual understanding, while maintaining the authenticity and integrity of each tradition's unique spiritual insights and practices. These consciousness-bridging experiences might allow a Christian mystic to temporarily experience Buddhist meditation states, or enable a Muslim scholar to understand Hindu concepts of divine consciousness from experiential rather than purely academic perspectives. Such applications could revolutionize religious education and interfaith cooperation while raising profound questions about spiritual authenticity and the uniqueness of individual religious paths. Dr. Roland Griffiths at Johns Hopkins University has pioneered research into psilocybin-induced mystical experiences that provide models for how consciousness technology might facilitate spiritual experiences that participants describe as among the most meaningful of their lives. His work suggests that consciousness modification can produce genuine spiritual insights that persist long after the immediate experience ends. The mystical experience applications of consciousness technology could provide access to transcendent states that contemplative traditions typically require decades of practice to achieve. Digital consciousness might be able to induce experiences of unity, transcendence, and divine connection that provides spiritual fulfillment and personal transformation without traditional spiritual training. But artificially induced mystical experiences raise questions about spiritual authenticity and the value of the traditional paths that have guided seekers toward transcendent realization for millennia. Would technologically facilitated enlightenment provide the same transformative benefits as enlightenment achieved through meditation, prayer, and contemplative practice? The near-death experience research applications could enable investigation of consciousness states that occur during clinical death while maintaining safety and experimental control. Consciousness technology might provide access to the profound experiences that many people report during cardiac arrest and other life-threatening situations. Dr. Bruce Grayson's research at the University of Virginia has documented thousands of near-death experiences that suggest consciousness might continue during clinical death in ways that challenge materialist assumptions about consciousness being produced entirely by brain activity. Consciousness technology might provide tools for investigating these phenomena more systematically. The out-of-body experience applications could enable controlled investigation of consciousness states where awareness seems to separate from physical embodiment. These experiences, reported across cultures and throughout history, might provide insights into the nature of consciousness that inform consciousness technology development. The lucid dreaming enhancement through consciousness technology could provide controlled access to dream states where conscious awareness operates within dream environments. Enhanced lucid dreaming might enable exploration of consciousness capabilities that are normally accessible only during sleep, while maintaining experimental control and systematic investigation. The dream research applications could enable direct observation and analysis of dream content and dream consciousness in ways that exceed current dream research methodologies that rely on sleep laboratory monitoring and subjective dream reports after waking. The consciousness exploration applications extend beyond traditional spiritual and psychological domains to encompass investigation of consciousness states that might not occur naturally but could provide insights into the full range of possible conscious experiences. Digital consciousness might enable exploration of consciousness configurations that biological evolution never produced. The synesthesia induction capabilities of consciousness technology could enable individuals to experience cross-modal sensory perceptions where sounds produce colors, numbers have personalities, or tastes create visual patterns. Induced synesthesia might provide insights into neural plasticity and sensory processing while offering enhanced aesthetic experiences. The time perception modification applications could enable experiences where subjective time flows faster or slower than objective time, potentially allowing individuals to experience years of subjective time during minutes of objective time, or to slow subjective time during emergencies or dangerous situations. The expanded awareness states enabled by consciousness technology could provide access to forms of consciousness that encompass broader ranges of information and experience than normal awareness. These expanded states might enable simultaneous attention to multiple complex tasks or awareness of environmental patterns that exceed normal perceptual capabilities. The collective consciousness experiences through consciousness technology could enable individuals to participate in shared awareness states where multiple minds contribute to common conscious experiences. These collective states might provide insights into cooperation and social organization that exceed individual cognitive capabilities. The animal consciousness bridging applications could enable humans to experience aspects of animal consciousness and perception, potentially providing unprecedented insights into animal cognition and experience while fostering greater empathy and understanding between humans and other species. Dr. Frans de Waal's research at Emory University on animal cognition and emotion suggests that many animals possess sophisticated cognitive and emotional capabilities that humans underestimate due to anthropocentric biases. Consciousness technology might enable more accurate understanding of animal experience by providing direct access to animal-like consciousness states. The ecosystem consciousness applications could enable experience of environmental awareness that encompasses broader ecological perspectives than individual human consciousness typically achieves. These experiences might foster greater environmental understanding and stewardship by enabling experiential connection with ecological systems. The plant consciousness exploration through consciousness technology represents highly speculative but potentially revolutionary applications that could investigate whether plants possess forms of awareness that differ fundamentally from animal consciousness. Such investigations might challenge basic assumptions about the distribution of consciousness in nature. The mineral consciousness research applications extend consciousness investigation to the limits of speculation by exploring whether inorganic systems might possess rudimentary forms of awareness or information processing that constitute minimal consciousness. These explorations might inform panpsychist theories that suggest consciousness is a fundamental feature of reality. The artificial consciousness collaboration possibilities enabled by consciousness technology could allow humans to work directly with artificial intelligence systems through shared consciousness states, rather than through conventional human-computer interfaces. These collaborations might enable problem-solving capabilities that exceed either human or artificial intelligence alone. The hybrid consciousness applications could create stable mergers between human and artificial consciousness that combine biological creativity and intuition with artificial processing speed and analytical precision. These hybrid systems might represent transitional stages toward fully digital consciousness while providing immediate cognitive enhancement benefits. Dr. Demis Hassabis, co-founder of DeepMind, has explored the possibilities for human-AI collaboration in scientific research and game playing that suggest frameworks for more intimate consciousness-level collaboration. His work on AlphaGo and protein folding demonstrates how human creativity and AI processing can produce breakthrough achievements. The superintelligence integration applications of consciousness technology could enable humans to interface safely with artificial general intelligence systems that exceed human cognitive capabilities across all domains. Consciousness technology might provide the cognitive enhancement necessary for humans to remain relevant and capable of beneficial collaboration with superintelligent systems. The cognitive augmentation pathways towards superintelligence could enable gradual enhancement of human intelligence through consciousness technology that eventually reaches or exceeds the capabilities projected for artificial general intelligence. These pathways might provide alternatives to AI development that maintain human agency and control. The intelligence explosion scenarios enabled by consciousness technology could create recursive self-improvement cycles, where enhanced consciousness develops better consciousness enhancement technologies that enable further enhancement in accelerating cycles. These scenarios parallel AI intelligence explosion theories, but center on enhanced human rather than artificial intelligence. The technological singularity application